Bwrdd pawb. Good morning, everyone. Croeso, welcome to the first of our board meetings of the new financial year, the first of our new IMTP. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining for the board today, and particularly some new board members, who I'll introduce now. Gareth Davis, you might want to give a wave as I introduce you, who's the Interim Executive Director of Operations. Ivan Evans, who's the Executive Director of Strategy. Morning, Ivan, Bwrdd, and Sarah Jane Taylor, the Director of People and Organisation, who's joining us as well. Warm welcome to all three of you joining your first formal public board meeting since you've joined Dhcw. And also like to welcome a colleague who we can't see, Nathan Couch, who's from one of our colleagues in Audit Wales, be working with us closely in the future. Welcome, Nathan. And also to all members of the public who've joined us for today's meeting. As is the current practice, we're conducting this meeting via Zoom virtually, and if you're not watching it now, people will be able to watch a recording of the meeting following the end of the meeting. It'll be up on our website. In terms of translation, we're providing translation facilities for any members of the board or people joining us who wish to speak through the medium of Welsh, and very much welcome that. For just people who aren't aware, if you need to hear the translation, then if you look at the little globe at the bottom of the screen and select Hear Translation, leave it on Original if you are able to. You don't need an English translation, and hopefully that will work. We tested it this morning and it was working fine. Apologies as ever if we're not looking at the camera. We've got screens over here and we've got notes down here, and so we do. You will find us flitting around rather than looking at the screen. So please bear with that. We will be taking a comfort break during the meeting, approximately 15 minutes if we're running to time, and that's down to me. Then we will take a 15-minute break, and we're scheduled to conclude today's business by 1:30. As I say, I've introduced the new members of the board, and also we'll be joined by Sally Pritchard for the presentation, on the story presentation, the listen and learn presentation. We welcome Sally. Before I get into the main business of the day, it's a sad moment now. I'd like us to take a moment's silence to remember our colleague Konrad Kudrzewinski, who was the head of quality and regulatory with Dhcw, who very sadly and untimely passed away in April. Konrad is a valued and much liked and respected member of the Dhcw team, and he'll be greatly missed. And on behalf of the board, Dhcw, and myself, I'd like to extend our sincere condolences to Konrad's family and friends at what must be a very difficult time. So perhaps we could, as a mark of respect and remembrance, take a moment's silence. Thank you very much, everyone. If we move into the agenda now, first, apologies for absence. We've had one apology for absence from Rowan Gardner, an independent member. I don't think there are any others because I see everyone here. Declarations of interest. We've had no declarations of interest. Has anyone got anything that's occurred to them since the agenda was published? No, thank you very much. So we're using the consent agenda as is the norm, and I'm assuming that everyone's read the papers, and I don't believe anything has been brought to Chris's attention for raising on the agenda. If there is anything, please let me know. No, thank you. So what we've been asked to do a number of things, which I'll go through in order, if I may. First, to approve the minutes as a true record from the board meeting held on the 31st of March. Are people happy to do that? Nodding will show assent. Thank you. And we're noting that there are no actions, no open actions on the action log. People agree with that. Thank you. And we're noting the contents of the forward work plan, including the items scheduled to come to future board meetings. And again, if you could nod consent, we're approving the allocation of the DHCW board champion roles. Thank you. So I'll move straight on to the main agenda now. And the first item, as ever, is the shared listening and learning presentation. As I say, we've been joined by Sally Pritchard for this item. Don't see Sally here at the moment, but I'm sure she will be joining us. But what I'll do, there we are. Hi, Bwrdd, Sally, and Bwrdd. I'll hand straight over to Rhidian Hill, Executive Medical Director, to introduce the item. And then following the presentation, there'll be an opportunity for anyone to raise any questions or comments. Rhidian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Virtually all clinical pathways rely on patients having access to efficient, timely, and cost-effective diagnostic services. Electronic test requesting is the process of requesting a clinical test using computer software and receiving the results, usually via the same application. It's hard to explain the assurance that this gives those involved in the pathway, because for the first time you can physically see that a test has been requested. You can identify that the test has reached the lab or the place where it needs to be vetted. You can see that it's in progress, and you can see when it's authorized, and you can be alerted when that test is authorized. So electronic test requesting delivers significant benefits, and we're going to see some of those benefits in the presentation shortly. The cost efficiencies that it delivers, the improvements in demand management are incredibly important, particularly when services are under pressure. And probably the most important thing, and the thing that's closest to my heart, is an improvement in patient safety related to the legibility of requests. Diagnostic tests basically can be divided broadly into those that come with a physical sample, say a biopsy, which needs a physical label to put on that sample, and those that do not. And the significance of that, I think, will become apparent in the presentation. So I'm delighted to introduce Sally Pritchard, one of our leading project managers, whose her personal drive and engagement has been very important in the leadership and implementation of this program. And I hope you enjoy the presentation and have questions at the end. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Rhidian. Bwrdd, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Sally Pritchard, and I am the product owner for electronic test requesting in DHCW, also known as ETR. Next slide, please. So this is a summary slide of all our ETR work streams, which sit in the single record program in DHCW. As Rhidian explained, a test request is simply when a patient needs a diagnostic test, a clinician sends that information to the relevant department, either accompanied by a sample or to be vetted. And our aim in the ETR team is to digitise all test requests in secondary and primary care across NHS Wales. So on the left is the work streams that are currently live. So we've got pathology ETR via the Welsh Clinical Portal in secondary care and GPTR in primary care, radiology ETR in secondary care, and result notifications in the Welsh Clinical Portal. And this is whereby the clinician is notified of a new authorised result on a dashboard in the Welsh Clinical Portal, and they can sign off each result electronically. Currently in development then in the middle, we have, we're going to replace existing paper processes, the histopathology test requesting, the cardiology test requesting, and we'll also be moving radiology ETR into primary care. So GPs can also use the electronic process and send a referral directly to the radiology system. And the other product currently under development at the moment is the phlebotomy module. So this is a mobile application where the phlebotomy team can use this application to support their processes. And on the right-hand side, I've listed some of the ETR work streams that we currently do not have funding or resource to deliver, but we have been asked by the health boards to develop. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to show now the workflow of a typical electronic test request. So this example is a blood science test request. And as I walk you through the process, I'll list some of the benefits it brings to the requester, the receiving department, which in this case is the laboratory, and ultimately the patient. So in the left-hand corner, the clinician makes the test request in either the Welsh Clinical Portal or in GPTR in primary care. And at this stage, the benefits for the requester is they have sight of the previous tests requested for that patient. So this means less repeat tests and therefore less rebleeding of patients, and in radiology, less radiation. And then the electronic test request also shows the requester their favorite test, so they can find tests really easily, and they can also request the same test for multiple patients at the same time. The barcodes are then printed on the ward or in the GP surgery, ready for the phlebotomy team. And those printed labels, as opposed to a written paper form, clearly show the phlebotomist the legible information. So positive patient identification is much safer. The phlebotomy team then take the sample and place the barcode onto the sample. And there is additional information in the ETR as well for the phlebotomist about which sample bottles to use. The sample is then received in the lab, and the barcode on the sample is scanned in the lab, with all that test request information being immediately available to the lab staff in their lab system, which is called WLIMS. This saves a huge amount of time in the lab, as there's no need for them to transcribe all that information from a paper form. It's all there immediately for them. Also, because some of the fields are mandatory in the electronic test request, there is much less likelihood of a rejection of a test request because the department receiving it has all the information they need. The requester can then see the status of the test in WCP, the Welsh Clinical Portal, as the sample is received and processed in WLIMS. And on authorization of the test result, the clinician is also immediately notified of a new test result via result notifications. So this speeds up the time to act upon the test result. The clinician doesn't need to wait for paper reports or to check for results. The result notifications can be accessed via the desktop WCP, or even on their mobile phone using WCP Mobile. And this pathology ETR form was actually evolved in 2020 to allow all COVID-19 testing units across Wales to electronically request COVID-19 tests, therefore saving a huge amount of time in the Public Health Wales labs, as they no longer needed to key in all that patient information from the paper forms. Next slide, please. So these are the main aims of all our electronic test requesting projects. The first one being we want to remove the paper process, therefore removing the dangers of poor transcription, misinterpretation, and loss of paper forms, etc. One of our aims is also, once the software is available, to increase the use of the electronic test request, which we do in collaboration with the health boards and business change floor walkers. We also want to improve the user experience of the ETR in secondary and primary care Wales. We want to provide a consistent user experience so that the clinician can order any type of test and the user interface will be the same. We also want to digitize the vetting process, removing the need to administer and maintain paper forms. And we want to improve service efficiencies. So, for example, removing the need to transcribe written requests on paper into the lab or radiology system will allow more clinical time in the lab or radiology department. So overall, we aim to provide a seamless, faster, end-to-end digital service. Next slide, please. So I've just listed here some of the constraints and issues to success that DHCW find with the ETR projects, and also the users, the health boards. So for DHCW, clinical and service engagement is sometimes a constraint. We need to agree future requirements for development. So we need to get agreement from the test requesters who are the senior responsible clinician, the consultants, and the service for the contents of that test request. So we need engagement from clinical requesters and the service like the lab or the radiology, and we need a consensus. Integrating the test result then with the different systems and adhering to standards is also a really complex task for us. And also for an ECR form to be designed and developed in DHCW, we need many different DHCW teams, including business analysts, technical design, database, integration team, many more. All these resources work on other projects, so it's always tricky managing the resource element of our projects. Once the software is available then and live in the health boards, there are still hurdles for those health boards to overcome. So firstly, connectivity. The speed of the web-based product, the Welsh Clinical Portal, varies according to the performance of the networks in the health boards. Also access to hardware and printers on the wards. The software we develop can be amazing, but without access to a desktop, the clinician will struggle to use that digital process as opposed to paper. Clinicians also need training and support with the new system, so business change is always needed. And really important is the direction from the clinical leads to use ETR. So without that backing of the clinical lead, the junior doctors who do a lot of the test requesting are likely to pick up the digital process. We also need buy-in and resource from the health board to prepare a new site to use an ETR, and a good service model. So for example, when a printer breaks on a ward, there is a process in place to get it fixed as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So I've just got a couple of stats to show you some of the progress that we've been making with the health boards in increasing the usage of ETR. So this is the pathology test requesting percentages along the health boards. All the health boards are on the up. I think our biggest success story, or their biggest success story, is Cardiff and Vale this year, who've had a huge increase from under 30 to over 80%. But all the health boards are using the lessons learned and collaborating with DHCW and together are definitely increasing. Next slide, please. This is the same for primary care. So GPTR, sorry, can you go back one? Thank you. So for primary care, for GPTR, these are also increasing. So a lot of hard work from the health boards, and DHCW has got into this as well. And then the next one, please, is the radiology numbers. Thank you. So for radiology test requests, we are live in CumTAF. And in March 2022, we went live in the ED department in Royal Glam with 24/7 requesting. So we saw a huge increase then from that. So really going well in Royal Glam since March. Next slide, please. So I'll just finish with what I believe are our key lessons learnt. Firstly, we must listen to the user. We've achieved this through virtual subject matter expert groups. We always make sure the test requesters and the service, or the laboratory or the radiology department or the cardiology department, attend, and they tell us what the priority is for new changes. They tell us how that change should behave and look, and decisions are made by the whole group if there is national representation and requesters and the service in the meeting. Decisions are made using MS Teams, voting polls, and we listen and develop based on that feedback. And we also develop our solutions firstly in a prototype, and we take this out to the users. So we'll go to the ward, test drive it with junior doctors, requesters, to make sure it's usable before we start the development process. Another lesson then is make sure the health board has enough resource. So the health board is ready. We shouldn't underestimate that resource needed for the health board to prepare for a go live. It has to be planned into the project plan, and the health board needs to be supported with that work as well. And then also preparing a site for go live. So we've learnt there must be adequate working printers, enough PCs for all the test requesters to access one, a good supportive clinical lead to direct the requesters, enough floor walkers and training materials to support the users, and also having that solution available 24/7 from the outset is important. Collaboration then, I think that it's worked really well for us working with the health board as a team in collaboration when preparing for any new ETR go live. So for example, with Radiology ETR, we've set up a working group with the health board radiology team, their WCP digital team, a lead clinician for the site, and the DHCW team, and we all meet very regularly so that we can support the health board using our experience in previous ETR go lives. And we've also found that progressing at the health board's pace has meant that the health board see us as a trusted partner. Also for pathology ETR, we've worked with the LINK programme, who have provided funding to health boards to increase their hardware and printers, which has also helped to increase the use of ETR. And finally then, making sure we plan for business as usual. So continuing to collect feedback after go live, continuing to engage with the health board after go live. Following the radiology ETR go live in Cwmtaf, we still regularly meet with that team, with that health board team, to ensure any issues are resolved quickly and we can work with them and improve the process and continue to get feedback. And we make sure we respond to the feedback. So any feedback we've had on form changes, we try to implement as quickly as possible to show the users that we're listening to what they're saying. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful, very interesting. I've got a few questions, but I know Marion has her hand up, and then David.
Diolch Cadeirydd, I'm going to speak in Welsh. Diolch yn fawr am y cyflwyniad yna. Mae hwn yn datblygiad pwysig iawn yn dydi, a dwi'n siŵr bod ni gyd fel bwrdd yn croesawu'r datblygiad yma. Mae'n amlwg yn mynd i wneud y gwasanaeth iechyd yng Nghymru yn llawer iawn mwy effeithiol, yn cyflymu'r broses o gasglu a rhannu canlyniadau profion, ac yn bwysicach na dim, fel yr awgrymodd Rhydian, mae o'n gwella ansawdd y gofal i'r claf. Ond allan ni ddim peidio sylwi gymaint o wahaniaeth sydd yna yn y defnydd mae rhai byrddau iechyd yn ei wneud o'r dechnoleg yma i gymharu â byrddau eraill. A mae'n nghwestiwn i falle wedyn yn codi be mwy allwn ni fel bwrdd i wneud i sicrhau bod y byrddau i gyd yn camu i'r un cyfeiriad fel bod ni'n ddi-bapur, yn gyflawn ddi-bapur o ran y gwasanaethau sydd ar gael yn barod. Diolch yn fawr.
Go on, Sally, you just pick up, or and between, and Rhydian, if you want to, you just come in. Don't wait for me.
Okay, thank you. I think from what I said in the presentation, the health boards do need support. They do need sometimes extra funding to make sure they've got enough hardware on the wards to be able to use the digital process. So we do work with them and the LINK programme to make sure they have got that in place. But also the message about using the ETR needs to come from above in the health board. So the junior doctor won't just make a decision themselves just to start using it. They'll carry on using paper if that's what they're being told by their senior. So it has to come from above. So I think the collaboration with the health board, clinical leads and everything is really important. I think DHCW need to do that in order for it to be successful.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that. So there's a couple of elements to this, Marion. One is clinical championship. So the advantage of me informing the team that are looking after the patient to do it is that those results are visible wherever I am, and I may not be in the location where the patient is. So that remote element is important. But also there's a drive, there needs to be a drive from local pathology labs for the change management involved for them. Ultimately, there are many ways to deliver something. One of them is to remove the paper from the system. But there is a sort of joke going around at the moment in terms of one of the clinical skills that are required in the delivery of care for a patient. So you introduce yourself to the patient, you take a history, you do an examination, and then you go and fix the printer before you can do anything else. And actually, it's the barrier of the hardware which is preventing the improvement of the system. And we as a board, of course, don't control that element of the local service, but we should vocalize the necessity that in the same way we provide hot water and soap, we should be providing computer systems that maximize the opportunities for people to do the right thing.
David.
Thanks, Sally, for the presentation, and Ridian for the introduction. I found it really useful. The thing that stood out for me was how the process of onboarding at the health board has evolved to the point where you've now got a sort of ready-made checklist of things that need to be in place before we can even attempt to deploy. I thought that was a really good point. I did have a question though about the business as usual and the funding for that. So as you've described, this is a really good product. There are some modules in development, and there's a couple on the vision that aren't funded yet. But one of the key elements going forward, I think, is keeping the core team together to continue to evolve the product. And I was just checking to see whether that funding is actually in place for you to do that.
So we do have funding to originally develop the ETR in the first place. We do then try to keep as much contact with the health board following a go live, and we hold those SME groups to ask for what future requirements they would like us to develop. There is some funding for that, but usually from a project point of view, we are supposed to hand over the responsibility to operational side of the single record as opposed to the product development side. So there is an element of that, although to be honest, once you're the contact in the health board for how to solve an issue, you kind of remain that forever, really. So yeah, we at the moment, I would say we try our best to always stay in contact and have regular meetings with the health board. We still continue to hold those subject matter expert user groups so that they can come to us with feedback and we can get a consensus from them on a national decision made for future requirements.
Yeah, Sally, if you don't mind, David, I'd expand further. So you'll be aware of Welsh Government policy, the Statement of Intent for Pathology, Statement of Intent for Radiology. So there's policy buy-in to this. There's an electronic test requesting board that has SROs from various projects. If you look at the major digital programs, be pathology, the RISC program, the radiology program, and digital cellular pathology. So we have a user group. We attract funding from various programs and business cases. It's not a perfect world, David, which is why we tend to be doing these things sequentially rather than parallel. We're doing our best as executive directors to support this team because their knowledge base has dramatically improved over the last 4 years, and we want to retain that skill mix for future programs.
Thanks, Ridian. I appreciate the candor around how we're funding the program. It's really great. I think Claire might come in on this, but one of the challenges we face as a new organisation is trying to change the funding model from Welsh Government so that we don't have to do what you've just described, and it's just part of the way we do business. But at that point, I'll keep quiet and hand over to Claire.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Sally. Yeah, just to confirm what the current process is around the funding. So we have an SLA, or service level arrangement, with the health boards and trusts that will cover the day-to-day operational aspects of this once it goes from development into business as usual, for want of a better word. And then if there is further development, those normally go through a service request process through DHCW. But I would agree, as more and more of these improvements come, it's more important that we get that calculation right so that we keep the DHCW is able to sustain that level of service. Yeah, and then as Ridian alluded to, as you can see from the benefits of the uptake of this particular system, there is real value to the NHS in Wales for us to continue to do that, but do it in a way that's sustainably funded.
Yeah, can I just want to highlight one of the benefits. The repository currently holds over 211 million test results, which are visible to any clinician anywhere in Wales. This is unique across the home nations because of the way that the infrastructure has been developed in a collaborative way. Over 30,000 users of the system, both across primary care, acute care, 111, WAST. What that means is you can see things that you couldn't previously see, which means you're not repeating them. And that therein brings the improvement in the patient journey, the visibility of the tests and the cost efficiencies to the service.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I'll tell you why. This is going to be quite entertaining because we appear to have arrived in a building construction site in the office at the moment, and there's someone trying to drill a hole into my office. So I'm going to have to put it on mute as much as possible, not to interfere with the meeting. So apologies if you hear lots of loud banging, and we had one enormous crash a moment ago. So apologies for that. Thank you very much, Radian and Sally. Does anyone else have any questions? I only had one, which is just personal ignorance. What is spirometry, and should I be concerned if I have to have one of those tests?
It's a test where you blow into a tube.
Lung function test.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I probably should be. Thank you very much, and thank you again, Sally and Radian, for introducing. So if we move on. Thank you for
having me.
Sorry, I missed something. Cheerio. So if I move on to the next item on the agenda, which is my chair's report. You'll see you've all have had an opportunity to read the report. I won't go through it word by word, but perhaps pick out a few key things in there to draw to your attention. The first is the ministerial meeting with the chairs in March. It's some time ago now, but two key issues really there that were on the minister's agenda, which is obviously the current delivery issues, and that meeting was just before the publication of the recovery plan. So there was discussions around the nature of the recovery plan that people have had a chance to have a look at since its publication. And then obviously it was just in advance of the submission dates for the IMTPs across the system, and so the minister was keen to stress her priorities in that, and once again she reiterated her focus on the strategic importance of digital in NHS Wales, and that's something that we obviously welcome and will be seeking to understand from the minister how she operationalizes, if you like, that commitment and that focus. We had a very pleasant event, the Dhcw Staff Awards, which was obviously my first staff awards, my pretty much first time out with a large group of people for 2 years, and it was it really was a very pleasant occasion where we gave out a number of awards. And interestingly, we focused, I think it was 7 of the awards on the Future Generations Act categories. So that I think was a very good read across with that piece of legislation in Wales. The committee meetings, the important thing to note here is now that picking up on our commitment to do as much as is humanly possible and digitally possible in public, the committee meetings are now recorded, and you'll see links in my report to an audit and assurance committee and a very recent digital governance and safety committee if people wish to go and see and follow the proceedings at those committees. I've now completed my review of the objectives, which are very much organizational objectives, and as you would expect, and I have my review meeting with the minister. I think it's early June. I think it may even be next week or the week after. It's very soon, and that will also give me an opportunity to have a conversation around that thing I just mentioned around putting into operation commitments and focus and priorities around digital in NHS Wales. We are moving ahead with the process of recruiting an independent member to replace the Sian, who left us for Pastures New last year, and that is on schedule. And I would hope by the end of June, I would have thought at the latest. You can probably hear my background noise now. That we will hear by the end of June who the replacement is once the minister has made her decision on the basis of the recommendation from the panel. Helen and I met with the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, which is again a very useful conversation, and a good deal of the discussion was around one of our key risks, if not our key risk, around skills, and how we develop the skills that we need and recruit the workforce we need, which is very much on her agenda as well, and particularly getting good, well-paid jobs into communities that perhaps have not had access to those roles in the past as much as they should do. So that was a very useful conversation that we will continue. You'll see there the list of board briefings that we've had. I won't list them, that they're there for you to note, and equally the board development activity that we've had over the since the last formal public board meeting, some of which is obviously coming back to this meeting in terms of the board assurance framework, and some which will come to a future board meeting, which is to formally sign off the accounts, and Claire and her team very helpfully took us through where we were in terms of our financial outturn for 21-22, and then also an update on where we are around the Welsh Government's health and care digital strategy, which is obviously not a little unimportant to us in terms of our work and our role in that strategy, and we look forward to seeing the publication of that strategy in due course. Happy to take any questions on any of those items if people wish to raise anything. If not, if I just ask you to note the report and then hand over to Helen for the Chief Executive's report. Helen.
Diolch, Simon, Bwrdd a pob. Just some highlights really to raise for me, and I'll apologise in advance because I haven't got my noise cancelling headphones on, and I'm in the same vicinity as Simon, so we may hear some crashes and bangs. So just to take you through, just to say that since the last board meeting, we've now stood down our emergency response structures in the health board. You'll recall we stood them back up again, given where we were with the the Omicron virus earlier in the year, and then of course some of the challenges we wanted to be on top of in terms of cyber threat through this situation in Ukraine. But we've now got to the point where we've stood down the emergency response, but just to say that there are still continuing and ongoing requirements, particularly in the vaccine program space, and that will continue and evolve actually as the work for the exploration and development of a national vaccine service moves forward. In terms of staff briefing, Ivan came to the staff briefing this month and introduced himself to over 500 of the staff, so quite a lot of engagement there and lots of questions, so I think that was really well received by all of the staff, and we'll do the same for future sessions with our new directors as well. And we also discussed our approach to hybrid working, and now more of us are returning into the office more of the time, so we will over the summer be undertaking a review of that, and we talked to the staff about that. But I have to say it has been great to meet and see people in person now over the last couple of months. Definitely I've enjoyed that. Digital medicines. So since writing this report, actually, we've had some developments, and whilst the programme is establishing and lots of great work is underway and lots of great kind of engagement across the service and actually with colleagues in NHS Digital for some of the aspects of the programme. In terms of the electronic prescribing and medicines administration programme, as part of that portfolio of work that's being taken forward, we've now restarted the framework procurement because through engagement with our suppliers, we identified a few areas where we think we could have been clearer on requirements, and given the scale and pace that we want to move at with this, we felt that actually we probably wanted to take a bit more time on just a small number of the requirements to make sure we had no ambiguity in that. So we're refining a small number of them over the coming weeks with a view to reissue the ITT next month, which will aim to get to our September board for approval. And just like to echo Simon's sentiments and pass on our sincere condolences to Conrad's family and friends. A close and trusted colleague, and we've done all we can really to support to support the staff and close friends. Actually, he had created quite a close-knit community and network around him, and I'd like to really thank Claire for the support that she's given her team, which through what has been you know, a really upsetting time. So and again, just to say how sadly he will be missed, because he was a really valued member of the team. In terms of executive director recruitment, Simon mentioned at the outset of the meeting, we've got 3 new faces around the board table, so really delighted to get the team out together, and we've been meeting quite a lot in person and virtually for the last couple of months now, so it's great. So we've got Ivan in place as the Director of Strategy, Gareth as the Interim Director of Ops, and Sarah Jane as our Director of People and OD. So really pleased to start to get the full team together. In terms of the outstanding director post, that's the Director of Primary, Community and Mental Health Digital Services. I think we are imminently going to push the button on the recruitment for that, so the advert will either be out tomorrow or early next week. So really pleased to hopefully get to an appointment later this summer, and to complete then the appointment of the team. The strategic engagement session, so as you see, we had our most recent one with Cardiff, a really positive session, so we're continuing those. They're quite challenging in terms of diary and getting us to getting both exec teams together, but really valuable discussions. So more of those are planned in for coming months. And then the staff conference, we did it virtually, so we debated whether we were going to do kind of hybrid or in person. At the time we were arranging it, things were still a little unsure in terms of the where we were with the pandemic, so we did it virtually over 2 days. I have to say, I want to thank all of the staff who engaged. We had between 500 and 600 people on most of the calls and most of the sessions, so great engagement. And you know, I want to commend the staff for taking the time out of the day job to really focus in on their development and to share actually a lot of the work that we've been doing. So there was great engagement and great presentations from staff within the organisation, and from you know, a number of external speakers coming to share kind of the work and that they're doing in really key areas for us. So I think it's a huge success actually. I don't think that's overstating, and it was a great kind of 2 days to really kind of hear directly from people what they're doing, and actually to have some of that kind of open engagement. So we did the best we could actually in a virtual world to actually still have that kind of, you know, engagement and interaction in the session. So a lot of energy actually, given that it was a virtual event. So thanks all who were involved in that, and thanks to the team that actually organised all of that for us. And another piece of good news for us, and this one's been quite a long time in the making actually, one close to my heart from my previous role in a previous life. We've now got the Digital Economy Act Trusted Third Party status, the accreditation to state that we are able to provide that function, if you like, to provide data to the Sale Data Bank in Swansea University. So just want to say well done to everyone in Rachel Powell's team who've been involved in that, and the wider organisation actually, because it was definitely a team event. But yeah, really well done. It means now that, you know, more and more data can actually be sent via us into the Sale Data Bank, because we provide the anonymisation process to enable that really valuable research facility to do what it needs to do. And finally, really, the last point to just pull out is the cancer informatics program. You'll have picked up perhaps from the performance report and the risk sections we'll cover later. We've now, I'm really pleased to say, now agreed a revised go live with Bwrdd University NHS Trust for the replacement of much of the CANISC functionality that they use day in, day out across the entirety of that, the Bwrdd Cancer Centre, to actually run cancer pathways and services. So the revised date is for mid-November, with health boards planning to go live ahead of that in terms of supporting the multidisciplinary team elements of the pathway that happen in the local health boards. So really good news that we've landed that date, and that plan is being taken forward. That was it from me, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Helen. Anyone got any questions or comments? No, people happy to note the report, I'm sure. Lovely, thank you. If we move on then to part 5, and the first is the board assurance framework, which I mentioned that we'd had a board development day around recently, and ask Chris Darling to introduce this. And I think you're going to bring in other members of the executive team at appropriate points in the as we go through it. Chris, over to you. And can I just point out, Chris is also in a building site, like there are like a number of us. So apologies for any background noise that Chris experiences.
Yeah, it's suddenly gone quiet, so I'm going to take the opportunity to present quickly. I'm going to introduce the item, Simon, as you say, but I am going to bring in colleagues to work through various elements. So I'm presenting here today the board assurance framework and the board assurance report that we've developed. Because this is the first time we've presented this to the board, I am just going to take a bit of time to run through the report and just work through some of the terminology that's included within the report. So when I refer to the BAF, that is the board assurance framework, and the BAF report, the board assurance framework report. It's also probably worth noting that we use the term strategic missions. These can be used interchangeably with strategic objectives. So last year we referred to strategic objectives 21-22. This year, financial year, our IMTP refers to strategic missions. There are 5 strategic missions that DHCW have. A couple of other terms that are used within the report: principal risks, again, also referred to as strategic risks. These are the primary risks to achieving our strategic missions. Key controls are the mechanisms in place to protect against the threat of those risks. And assurances are the mechanisms to provide evidence that the organisation is effectively operating in relation to those specified risks. So hopefully that just clarifies some of the terminology before I get into the report. So I'm just going to talk through item 5.1 and pick out some of the key points. So the board assurance framework itself is included as item 5.1i, and this contributes to the overall governance assurance framework. From this framework, we've developed the board assurance report, which is 5.1ii, and this is a document that I'm going to spend the majority of the time just working through. So the development of the BAF report, board colleagues that have been with us since the start of the organisation will recall that we approved this time last year in May at our board meeting the risk and board assurance framework strategy. A key element of that strategy was to develop a board assurance framework report, and that's what we're bringing here today. The table under section 1.3 of the cover paper sets out the differences between the board assurance report and the risk register process. So I think the key points to note here is that the board assurance report solely focuses on delivering the risks to delivering the organization's strategic missions. And the board assurance report is a top-down process where the strategic or principal risks are identified, assessed and owned at board level. In contrast, the risk register process relates to a number of risks that come up through department, service and project risk registers. There's a lot more of them, and it's a bottom-up process. So the risks that come through the risk register process, if they are severe enough, they will be allocated onto the corporate risk register. In terms of the board assurance report dashboard, it's designed to provide the board with information on what the principal risks are to delivering our strategic missions and what we as an organisation are doing to manage and mitigate those risks. So it's essentially ensuring that we are on track in taking forward our strategic missions over the course of the next year and beyond. So I'm just going to talk through each of the strategic missions. So these are articulated under section 2.1 of the cover paper. Each strategic mission is assigned to an executive lead. These are listed out in that table as well. And as I said, I will ask colleagues to come in shortly just to work through each of their areas. So within the BAF report template, there is the DHCW risk appetite statement. Again, this was approved by the board in November. And just a key point from this statement, just going to pick out DHCW must take risks to achieve its strategic aims and deliver beneficial outcomes to stakeholders. So we are aware that we will and have to take risks to deliver our strategic missions. That's set out within our risk appetite statement. We've also broken down our risk appetite to the 10 domains that we've previously agreed and the risk tolerances for each of these domains. In terms of risk appetite, it should be noted that there will be more work between now and the next public board meeting where we look to assign a risk appetite for each of the 5 strategic missions. This is really important for the next iteration of the Board Assurance Framework Report, as it will consider areas of risk where we are explicitly cautious or adverse, things like citizen safety, storing and maintaining patient information. But there are also areas that we're very explicitly open and want to take more risk for things like developing new services. So, as I say, we are continuing to work on our risk appetite for each of the strategic missions and the principal risks that threaten our delivery of those missions. In terms of the dashboard itself, there's an assurance summary which provides an overview of the current risk score and the target risk score, and the rationale agreed by the executive owner for those risk scores. The principal risks are defined and articulated within the dashboard, and this work has taken place over a number of months and included a number of executive and board development sessions. We've taken a 5x5 likelihood times impact matrix approach to each of the principal risks in terms of risk scoring and identifying a target risk score. And for each of the strategic principal risks, there's a heat map within the template which shows the planned direction of travel to the target risk score. So generally trying to reduce either the likelihood or the impact or both. So within the dashboard, there's a single slide for each of our strategic missions and principal risks. Included within is a red, amber, green RAG assurance self-assessment rating, which will be undertaken for future iterations of the board assurance framework by the executive lead, taking into account the controls and assurances in place, the corporate risks assigned to that relevant strategic mission, and the associated activity to mitigate those risks, and the key actions and improvement controls planned. So at the moment, those RAG statuses are set to amber. Work over the next 2 months will take place with the executive owner agreeing a RAG status, which will come back to the next board meeting. So there is still work to do in terms of fully populating the board assurance report, and this will include population of the RAG status. Part of the risk appetite discussions that we will take place will help us to establish if the board want to see a higher number of controls, reflecting a more cautious approach to our risk appetite, or whether we want to potentially reduce some of our controls, suggesting a more hungry or open risk appetite for those strategic missions. So work in terms of timeframe for completing the gap analysis of controls will take place over the next 2 months, and that will be presented with the self-assessment score to the July board meeting. So the proposal is that the board assurance framework report will be brought in future to the board twice a year and to assess progress. This year we're planning to bring it 3 times. So today, July, to incorporate the risk appetite discussions and outcome, and then again in November. But we're hoping in future years it will come in May, following the confirmation of the strategic missions as part of the IMTP process, and then working back through the principal risks, and then a half-yearly review of progress. The most important thing to emphasize in developing the board assurance framework report is that it gives the board ample opportunity at time and focus to discuss our strategic missions and be aware of the actions we need to take in order to pursue those. and be aware of the key risks and how we mitigate those. So I will now hand over to each of the executive leads for their areas, just to talk through at a very high level the aim of the strategic mission within which they're responsible for, the principal risks, some of the key controls in place now, and some of the forward actions. And there are 4 individuals. So I'm going to start by asking Ivan if you can talk through the strategic missions 1 and 3, followed by Gareth to talk through strategic mission 2, then Rydian strategic mission 4, and finally Helen to do strategic mission 5. So Ivan, I'll hand over to you.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Chris. Gadeirydd, wi jyst yn mynd i gymryd y cyfle I nodi mai dyma fy nghyfarfod bwrdd cyntaf, a wy'n falch iawn bod fi wedi ymuno gyda'r tîm a bwrdd ond y sefydliad hefyd, a jyst yn cyfeirio nôl at be ddwedodd Helen yn ei adroddiad, ynglŷn â ymhell dros hanner staff y sefydliad yn ymuno gyda'r digwyddiadau sydd yn eithriadol ac yn jyst yn dangos lle mae'r ysbryd yn y sefydliad. Wy'n mynd I siarad I 2 o'r amcanion strategol, rhif 1 a rhif 3. Mae yna 5 thema I gyd. Maen nhw yn eleinio yn erbyn ein cynllun 3 mlynedd. Weithiau pwysleisio, mae dogfen strategol yw hon, felly wy'n arwain ar draws y sefydliad. Dyw e ddim yn sefyllfa lle mae bob thema o fewn cyfarwyddiaeth, I ni gyd yn cydweithio, ond i'r bwrdd fi sy'n gyfrifol am roi sicrwydd ar lefel strategol bod ni'n gwneud cynnydd yn erbyn yr amcanion ni wedi gosod i'n hunain. Ac o ran beth yw ystyr sicrwydd yn erbyn y prif risgiau, oes mae yna elfen o reoli, hynny yw sicrwydd bod yna ddealltwriaeth yn union beth ni'n gwneud, ond mae yna sicrwydd hefyd bod ni fel bwrdd a hyder yn bod ni'n gwneud cynnydd tuag at yr amcanion ni wedi gosod i'n hunain. Felly dyw e ddim I gyd am y reoliadau, mae yna elfen hefyd o gael llwybr strategol a cael hyder yn bod ni yn symud ymlaen ar hyd y llwybr hynny. A wy'n mynd I geisio, yn amlwg, mae'n ddigon anodd cyflwyno ar hwn yn Saesneg, fel glywch chi oddi wrth Chris. Mae yna gryn dipyn o derminoleg yn ymwneud â hwn. Wy'n mynd I fod yn cyfieithu rheini ar y pryd o'r Saesneg i'r Gymraeg, a mi fydd Nerys yn cyfieithu nhw ar y pryd o'r Gymraeg nôl i'r Saesneg. So wy'n gobeithio bydd hwnna'n gyd yn gweithio, a wy'n siŵr y bydd wedi gweithio gyda Nerys o'r blaen. Felly, yr un cyntaf yw galluogi trawsnewid digidol mwyn bod ni'n gallu cynnal gwasanaethau gofal sydd yn gyson, rhai sydd yn ddiogel a rhai sydd yn integredig a sydd yn gwneud y cysylltiadau cywir yn y maes, yn ysbyty neu yn pa bynnag leoliad arall. Mwy na dim, mae hwn am osod llwyfan sicr a chadam i'r gwaith ni'n gwneud. Wi jyst yn tynnu sylw at 2 agwedd o trawsnewid digidol. Felly ydy mae fe am y gwasanaethau digidol nhw hunain, hynny yw ein swyddogaeth ni fel corff yw trawsnewid y gwasanaethau digidol I ni'n darparu ar draws Cymru, ond mae fe hefyd am sut mae gwasanaethau digidol yn gallu trawsnewid gwasanaethau iechyd a gofal. Dyna yw eu pwrpas nhw. Rydyn ni yn datblygu offer ac amcanion a gwasanaethau a gwybodaeth sydd yn galluogi bobl broffesiynol a cleifion nhw hunain I newid y ffordd maen nhw'n derbyn gofal. Felly mae yna 2 agwedd o trawsnewidiaeth yna. Ond fel wedes I, y prif bwyslais fan hyn yw cael llwyfan, gadarn a sicr. Mae yna bethau lle mae rhaid I ni gael y balans cywir. I ni eisiau llwyfan sydd yn agored yn galluogi bobl I weithredu ar hwnnw yn cynnwys partneriaid allanol, ond ar yr un pryd mae rhaid iddo fe fod yn llwyfan diogel iawn o ran y gwybodaeth sydd arno fe, data a preifatrwydd, ond hefyd o ran gwarchod seibr a'r bygythiadau hynny I ni'n gwynebu. Mae angen iddo fe fod yn ddibynnol ac yn sicr, hynny mae'n rhaid iddo weithio drwy'r amser, 99.999% o'r amser, ond mae hefyd angen iddo fe fod yn hyblyg yn medru ymateb i'r heriau sydd o'i blaenau a gallu addasu i'r dasg sydd o'n blaenau ni. Y ffordd I ni'n delio gyda hynna yn bennaf yn y maes hwn yw trwy safonau, gosod safonau clir ag amlwg, a wedyn gweithio'n agos gyda defnyddwyr I sicrhau bod y safonau hynny yn cael ei gweithredu a bod bobl yn cydlennu â nhw. O ran y rheoliadau sydd gyda ni eisoes, mae gyda ni fframweithiau ar gyfer data, ar gyfer gwybodaeth a rheoli gwybodaeth, ar gyfer seibr. Mae yna fyrddau sydd yn gosod safonau a technoleg a phethau tebyg, a ni'n gweithio'n agos gyda Llywodraeth Cymru sydd yn amlwg ar awdurdod I roi rhyw fath o fandad ar safonau ar draws y system trwy Gymru gyfan. Wy'n credu mae yr ardal i ni ddatblygu, a fel mae Chris wedi dweud, mae cryn dipyn o waith datblygu i'w wneud ar hwn dros yr misoedd nesaf, yw cytuno'n llwybr strategol ni o ran datblygu rhai o'r pethau yma. Mae yna reoliadau yn ei lle, ond sut allwn ni wneud nhw'n fwy effeithiol, sut allwn ni ddatblygu o fewn y fframweithiau hynny a gweithio gyda bobl eraill i wneud hynny ddigwydd. So dyna'r cyntaf. Wi wedyn yn neidio ymlaen i rhif 3. Mae Gareth fel brechdan yn mynd i ddod ar yn ôl i yn sôn am rhif 2. So wy'n symud ymlaen i rhif 3. Mae rhif 3 yn sôn yn bennaf am y cofnod iechyd a gofal sengl. Mae'n hawdd meddwl am hwn, ac wir nes i yn reiddiol meddwl am hwn mewn ffordd weddol syml, just am y data. Ond dwi ddim yn meddwl mae'r data yw'r peth. Mae'r data yn fwy yn rhan o'r seilwaith sydd gennym ni. Y gwybodaeth sydd yn bwysig. Fel glywch chi yn y cyflwyniad yn gynharach yn y bwrdd heddiw, mae gyda ni gofnodion ar draws y system yng Nghymru sydd ar gael i bawb. Mae data hynny'n cael ei gadw, ond y peth pwysig yw bod ni'n gallu trosi hwnnw mewn i wybodaeth sydd yn cael ei ddarparu i bobl broffesiynol ac i gleifion nhw hunain wrth bod nhw yn defnyddio gwasanaethau gofal. A fi'n credu bod na thema sydd yn rhedeg trwy hon i gyd ynglŷn â ymweru defnyddwyr. A mae defnyddwyr yn meddwl am bobl broffesiynol, doctoried, nyrsed, bobl sy'n darparu gofal, ond hefyd yn meddwl cleifion nhw hunain, a'i teuluoedd a rhwydweithiau cymdeithasol sydd yn eu cefnogi nhw. A mae hwnna'n faes i byddwn ni eisiau datblygu dros y blynyddoedd nesaf. Mae tipyn o waith i'w wneud yn yr ardal hynna. Felly trosi o data i wybodaeth, sicrhau bod y gwybodaeth yn ei ar gael yn amserol, bod e'n gyflawn, a bod bobl yn gwybod bod e'n gyflawn, a hefyd bod e'n eglur ac yn addas at bwrpas. Fel wedodd Rhydian, mae yna 211 miliwn o gofnodion, profion a phethau tebyg. Mewn un cofnod ar gyfer un claf, ar gyfer rhai cleifion mi fydd yna gannoedd ohonyn nhw. Mae'r staff sydd yn gofalu amdanyn nhw, beth sy'n rhaid i ni wneud yw sicrhau bod ni'n gallu rhoi rhai sydd yn fwyaf perthnasol, a rhai sydd yn fwyaf pwysig iddyn nhw weld o flaen y staff proffesiynol, mwyn bod nhw'n gallu defnyddio hwnni. A bod nhw hefyd yn gallu gweld y cofnod hanesyddol yn ei gyfanrwydd pe bai angen gwneud hynny. Felly mae yna fwy na just gyflwyno data. Mae fe ynglŷn â sut i ni'n defnyddio gwybodaeth. Mwyn sicrhau bod hyn yn digwydd o ran rheoli ar hyn o bryd, mae gyda ni fyrddau rheoli gwasanaethau digidol, mae gyda ni brosesau adolygu a dysgu pan mae pethau yn mynd yn dda, a hefyd pan mae pethau ddim yn mynd mor dda. Angen ni'n derbyn adborth glinigol trwy'r amser yn gweithio yn agos iawn gyda rhwydweithiau clinigol, gyda clinigwyr unigol a gyda staff. Fi'n credu mae'r maes i ni ddatblygu dros y misoedd nesaf i'w edrych ar sut allwn ni ymestyn o'r dulliau ni wedi cael am rai blynyddoedd ar fframweithiau hynny sydd gyda ni, mwy mewn i'r maes o ymchwil defnyddwyr a cynllunio defnyddwyr, beth yn Saesneg byddai'n cael ei alw yn user research, user-centered design, a phethau tebyg. Fel bod ni ddim yn atal gwneud beth i ni wedi bod yn gwneud, ond bod ni hefyd wrth ochr hwnnw yn rhoi rhai o'r dulliau sy'n cael ei ddefnyddio mewn rhai meysydd eraill a sectorau eraill digidol, mwyn bod ni'n gallu darparu gwybodaeth sydd mor bwrpasol a phosib. Felly, wy'n mynd i stopio fyna a pasio ymlaen i Gareth. Fi'n gallu gweld bod bobl yn nodio, so fi'n credu bod y cyfieithu wedi cadw lan gyda popeth. So, Gareth, i ti, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you very much, Ivan. And if I may echo what Ivan said, is I'm very excited to be part of the DHCW family now, and very excited also to attend my first public board. So hopefully you will go lightly on me. My strategic mission in itself seems straightforward: to deliver high quality technology, data products and services to support efficiencies and improvements in care processes. Yet we spent a lot of time on this particular mission statement because it was around the subject of high quality technology, which in itself is a relatively subjective term. What does delivering high quality look like? What does that mean? How do we know if we've attained it? I'll come back to that in a moment, but what we're trying to do on this is to deliver those efficiencies and improvements across care in general. So for example, across public health, we want to deliver high quality national digital programs to support public health prevention, early intervention programs across primary care, community care and mental health, developing, operating and maintaining a high quality national digital services that reflect new models of local care closer to home. In planned and unscheduled care, we want to enable new models of planned and unscheduled patient care and management. In diagnostics, to enable modernization of diagnostics, digital medicines to enable modernization of medicines management. To deliver high quality is to deliver to a standard, and by delivering technology to industry standard is in essence delivering quality. But how do we know it's quality to the people we're delivering to? And key to us getting that right, and it was alluded to earlier in the electronic test requesting that we heard, is user engagement, is having that intelligence to have that user research in the first place to know what the users want, and ensuring that loop is closed by following back up to say, are we delivering this at an appropriate level for you? Does it work? So having that user experience, that user data, that user research at the heart of what we deliver will give us good indication on that subjective term of quality, whether we are delivering quality. It's not just about delivering to industry standards. The other thing to mention, I think, around this is obviously if we don't deliver this, or we don't listen to the users, we don't have that intelligent user experience, we don't deliver. We will compromise our ability to deliver. It will be less effective. We will not be able to deliver a sustainable care. It could cause harm. We won't meet the expectations of our patients and professionals. Our reputation is impacted. And I think the last thing really to say around this is the key controls that we have in place to ensure we're doing this outside of the user experience. We have application architecture assurance groups that tell us the architecture we're putting out there, the open architecture even, is secure, it's robust, it's set of standards. And this is why there are so many risks associated with my mission, because you can imagine through an open architecture comes a lot of cybersecurity risks. So there are many of them, and that is to be expected. That's nothing to be fearful of, and they will be addressed, of course. Our award-winning service desk provides that service management piece on top to ensure that the performance of those services is where it needs to be, and that goes back to that user engagement piece. We have operational service boards, business continuity plans, service management boards, and what we will also have is a cyber forward plan, a cloud strategic plan, a service desk forward and strategic plan. So knowing where we want to go with our technology, and more importantly, how we're going to get there in a safe, robust way, is key to delivering on this objective. And as Ivan says, it is a plan that will evolve. Risks will be introduced regularly, I'm sure. But if we get our strategic aim right, we know where we're going, we know the tactics to use, which we do to get there. This is an objective that is achievable. So that's all I have to say. And are there any questions on that particular objective?
We'll pick any up at the end, I think, Gareth, and
okay.
Bring, if they're specific to any objectives, then we can ask you to come in, or Ivan, or Rydian, or
okay. Thank you, Chair. I'll pass over to Rydian then. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the safe delivery of the baton on your first board, Gareth. My role here on 4, driving value and innovation for better outcomes and value-based care. The aims of this strategic objective obviously include the delivery of a better direct care, the reduction of harm, the building on the principles of prudent health, value in health, and supporting the delivery of policies such as Healthier Wales to improve the care and health outcomes across our population. Another element of this is delivering research, insights and innovation for service improvement. And the third point I'd make is that the objective includes driving value out of the data for better outcomes generally, and enhancing the service planning, the sustainability of services, and the improvement of population health. To describe the risk we've adopted, and if then resulting in description. The risk to articulate is if we do not focus on making the use of data and innovation to improve outcomes, then we may not be optimizing value for citizens, resulting in less sustainable health and care services and reduced or delayed benefits for the public and the patients we serve. There are some key controls that we put in place for this objective. As you'd expect, we have strong, robust information governance, but we use that structure not only to keep the data safe, but to ensure that the data can be shared in a way which adds value. Information governance is there to enable safe, secure sharing and not a barrier to sharing. We also have clinical leadership in terms of the CIRO role, which Gareth occupies, and the Caldecott Guardian role that I occupy on behalf of the organisation. And there are certain things you expect us to be doing, including things like information asset registries and other processes that enable the storage, transfer, exchange and sharing of data in a way that it meets these strategic objectives. As you'd expect, there's always more to do, and we have planned actions going forward, some of which are stated in the papers today, including the delivery of a research and innovation strategy. As you know, we're currently developing that strategy and the implementation plan associated with that strategy, and that will be coming to board later in the year. We have processes which we continually review regarding how we approach research and innovation on behalf of the organisation and for key stakeholders we may hold information for. We are looking to strengthen our relationships with these partner organisations and have a rollout programme to engage with academic and industry partners. We are always looking for where value can be added to the services that we provide. And I'll finish with probably one of the key objectives that we're looking to deliver shortly, which of course is the data promise policy. Delivering that strategy in collaboration with the public and with policy leads so that we get ourselves to a position that we can share data in a way that people understand, that they trust, and that adds value to either their individual journey, their family's journey, their community's journey, their regional journey, and the nation as a whole. So I'll conclude there, Chair.
Over to you, Helen, isn't it?
Yes, apologies, I lost my mouse for a second to unmute. So the final mission is one for me, and actually it's the one that focuses more on how we do that as an organisation and who we are as an organisation in order to deliver the kind of strategic missions and objectives that colleagues have just set out, really. So this is about how we organise ourselves and how we set ourselves up to be that high-performing, inclusive organisation and a trusted strategic partner to the wider health and care system. So the strategic objective is about strengthening stakeholder relationships, working collaboratively with our partners across the health and care sector, really, and developing those digital roadmaps that we know actually we are pivotal in kind of facilitating that work. And that developing our digital capability and capacity through our workforce, a huge year for us this year in terms of workforce development, and you know, really timely that Sarah Jane joins the board, really, and that we have the Director of People as a board level position to actually recognise the value and importance of developing our staff, both our current staff and actually making sure that we develop the pipeline of talent we need for the future to achieve what we want to achieve for the health and care system. And one close to Claire's heart, but all of our hearts really, is the sustainable funding models that we need in place. So a huge kind of undertaking for us this year, really, in terms of setting out strategically what that sustainable financial arrangements need to be, and how we work with colleagues across the system, including Welsh Government, to ensure that we are able and we are set up to actually maximise the opportunity that we all know that digital and data will actually bring to sustainment and transformation and improvement of the wider health and care system. Another huge focus for us as an organisation this year, and perhaps this board meeting kind of evidences some of that, the steps that we're taking in that direction is the importance of the Welsh language and how we as an organisation embrace and the use of the Welsh language and drive up adoption and use of the Welsh language within the organisation, and how we support the wider kind of health and care system through digital services to ensure that people of Wales who wish to speak in their first language, if that is Welsh, that they are supported to do so across the health and care system through digital technologies. Another one that area of huge import for us now is the quality agenda, and this is an area that sits in Claire's portfolio, but actually it's one that is part and at the heart of all that we do across the organisation, and not doing quality as something that we're doing to assess as an afterthought or after the fact, actually having quality embedded right through all of the processes and procedures that we have as an organisation is absolutely key to that. And finally, really is to continue to embed kind of organisational governance, and the key leadership roles that we play here, and key leadership across the system as well in key areas, as Evan and Radian have pointed out, in areas like cybersecurity and information governance, and how we provide kind of that support to the wider system. So lots of key controls in place, because this is about who we are, you know, and how we operate as an organisation. So that's about the structures that I have in place through my team. That's about kind of how we have that strategic engagement across the piece with our stakeholders, and it's an area that we've spent a bit of time on kind of the early part of last year, really, as a board, recognising the importance of how we engage strategically with partners on developing and delivering our plans and the wider NHS plans, and a real focus on our staff and staff health and well-being. Never more important than now, really, and we were having a conversation about this yesterday, actually, in terms of, you know, some of the added pressures that we're all facing at the moment. We come out of the stress and some of the issues we've had around isolation and all of that through the last couple of years in how we've had to respond individually and collectively to the pandemic, straight into kind of some of the wider kind of anxious times that we have, and particularly around cost of living. So we'll look to see how we can support staff in that as part of our health and wellbeing plans. The recruitment and recognising you know, our workforce as our greatest asset and a key risk in terms of our ability to actually recruit and retain the highly capable, talented people that we have and that we need more of in the organisation. So a recruitment task force in place for that, and areas like the ISO audits that we talked to you about, and we're very proud of our commitment to demonstrating those quality standards, and really in terms of developing our broader relationships right across the piece, and that includes colleagues in the commercial sector and of course in academia to support some of that. So some of the gaps, really, or the areas of focus, I suppose, that are on our plans for this year are around kind of our organisational values, and we had a great start to that at the staff conference last month. And again, you know, over 500 people actually actively participating in the session to develop our core values as an organisation, and further work coming on that in coming weeks and months as part, really, of the development now. As Sarah Jane has joined us in terms of our people and OD strategy, and how we really kind of focus in on workforce and the key talent management and succession planning as key to all of that we need, and clearly the sustainable funding model, and we've been leading a piece of work to really try and set out what the 10-year kind of forecast looks like for digital, and Claire and her team have been leading that with colleagues right across Wales, really, just to really kind of set out what we anticipate the financial ask to be, really, in terms of where we're heading as NHS Wales. And the Welsh language scheme is currently being reviewed, and hopefully we will have that taken forward pretty soon, and the commercial strategy and plan to really kind of identify how we're kind of best communicating all the work that we're doing, but also, you know, closely aligned with the engagement piece, and actually, to be honest, the driving the adoption of what we've already got. You know, coming back to the great presentation we had on electronic test requesting earlier, actually it's about kind of really kind of being showcasing and ensuring that we're sharing all of the good work that's already there, as well as the good work that we're doing. So happy to end there and take any questions across the piece, Chair.
Are we coming back to you at all, Chris, or should we open it up for discussion now?
Happy to open it up, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any comments? Or I mean, that was a great presentation by all of you. I mean, I do feel we've got a really clear and coherent approach to this that will enable us to see, as you say, on the regularity, you identified the twice-a-year regularity around where we are, and give ourselves assurance of where we are around our key strategic aims, missions. I've got Grace and then David.
Diolch. Dwi'n dysgu Cymraeg, dwi'n trio siarad Cymraeg nawr, rwy'n nervous. Dwi'n equality bencampio, dwi'n edrych ymlaen yn helpu DHCW I fod yn gofal cynhwysol. Mae pawb yn bwysig, ond rydw fi siarad Saesneg nawr, sorry. As part of that quality champion focus, is there a further level of board assurance in the second line of oversight and scrutiny, perhaps the piece about transparency and governance we've been talking about? I wonder if it'd be useful to note there as part of our assurance, our commitments to holding board and committees transparently and openly in public, and in making sure that the content is coherent to people who are outside the direct operational delivery, like our patients and citizens and families and staff members who may be outside that particular directorate. But overall, it's a great report, and thank you so much for the hard work on it. And patience with my treasure.
Thank you, Grace. Helen, are you the person to pick up on that one, or around the quality
I
issues?
didn't mind pick.
Yeah, happy to pick that up, yeah.
Okay, David.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks everyone for the presentation, particularly Chris for introducing the topic. I just wanted to share my thoughts really on the development of the board assurance framework. Really good piece of work. Thank you, Chris, for leading on that, and for the executive team on taking ownership of their various strategic missions. The session we had at the board development day I thought was extremely valuable, particularly the breakout sessions where in smaller groups we had the opportunity with the executive lead to explore in much more detail. And my last point was really just to say that when we bring this back in November, if we could actually allocate some more time to those breakout sessions, they were really valuable. I just felt we probably just could have done with a little bit more time to have actually completed all that was asked of us. So if we could allocate a bit more time, I think that would be really, really beneficial. Thank you.
Chris.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback, David. And we have got time allocated at the next board development session to carry on some of those conversations. So particularly around risk appetite and just continuing what we did at the last board development. But I think we recognise more time and discussion would be useful in this area. So that is scheduled in. Thanks, David.
Marion.
Diolch Cadeirydd, ac ga i'n ategu yn gwerthfawrogiad ni fel bwrdd o'r holl gyflwyniadau. Maen nhw wedi bod yn ddefnyddiol iawn ac yn ddiddorol iawn. A da ni wrth gwrs yn y pwyllgor archwilio wedi gweld elfennau o'r gwaith yma'n dod ger bron yn ystod y misoedd diwetha. Ond dwi'n meddwl bod o'n hynod ddefnyddiol I gael yr holl wybodaeth yma'n cael ei dynnu at ei gilydd mewn un darlun cyflawn. effeithiolrwydd yn rheoliadau a'r prif elfennau na sy'n rheoli'n prif risgiau. Ac yn bwysicach falle'r y pethau na sydd yn o bosib yn milurio yn erbyn yn gallu ni I gyflawni yn amcanion. Dwi'n meddwl bod yr eglurder ag ansawdd y cyflwyniad yn wedi gael ag ansawdd y fframwaith wir yn batrwm. A dwi'n gwybod bod yna sefydliadau eraill ar draws Cymru sydd yn dal I stryglo, os liciwch chi, efo y gwaith yma. A dwi'n teimlo bod ni wedi gwneud cyfraniad pwysig iawn y bore yma. Ond mae'n cwestiwn ni'n ymwneud â sut dyn ni'n mynd I gyfathrebu efo'r staff, y cannoedd o staff sydd gyda ni o fewn y sefydliad I sicrhau bod pawb yn perchnogi'r meddylfryd yma o dryloeder a bod yn agored. Diolch.
Chair, can I respond?
Yeah, go on, Chris. Sorry, I was struggling to find my mouse and the unmute button at that point. Go on, Chris.
So just in terms, thank you for the feedback, Marion. Just in terms of the communication, so leading up to the development of the Board Assurance Framework Report, we have put on a number of training sessions, awareness raising around what a risk register is, what a Board Assurance Framework is, and what different roles within the organisations are and how they contribute to that. So I think we've had over 70% of our senior leadership team attend those sessions, which is really positive in terms of getting that message out there. In terms of our openness and transparency more generally, and how we operate as an organisation and as a board, as part of our corporate induction that we run, one of the members of my team attends that session to do an overview of corporate governance, and a key element of that is standards of behaviour and openness, transparency. So we do try and raise it as individual staff join the organisation, and we do also include information in our internal newsletter that we use to try and raise some of the information around openness and transparency.
Thank you, Chris. Ivan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, diolch Cadeirydd. Os ydych chi'n pigo lan ar y pwyntiau ynglyn â bod yn dryloyw oddi wrth gwrs a ynglyn â sut ni'n cyfathrebu a sicrhau bod pobl yn deall beth yw'n amcanion oddi wrth Marian. Wy'n credu mae'r allwedd I wneud hynny yw sicrhau bod yn holl ddogfennau a'n holl bolisïau yn amcanion strategol, y cynllun 3 mlynedd, yn cynllun busnes am y flwyddyn, y fframwaith perfformiad, I gyd yn gyson a'i gilydd, ac I gyd yn ategu yn atgyfnerthu I gilydd. Yn hytrach na, disgwyl bod pob aelod o staff yn Dhcw yn deall bob un o'r dogfennau hynny o top i'r gwaelod. Mae hynna'n eitha heriol. Mae sawl un o'r dogfennau hynny yn rhai arbenigol, really, at bwrpas penodol. A wy'n credu mae'r sicrwydd sydd angen I ni ar lefel bwrdd yw bod ni'n gwybod bod pawb yn mynd yn yr un cyfeiriad a bod nhw yn cael yr rheolaeth a hefyd yr amcanion I ni'n gosod yn bethau maen nhw'n gallu defnyddio yn effeithiol a defnyddio yn hawdd. A dyna pam wy'n credu o'r holl gyflwyniadau o'r 4 ohono ni, o'ch chi'n gweld ymateb I ddefnyddwyr gweithio'n agos gyda defnyddwyr yn dod trwy yn bob un o'r themau hynny, yn arbennig i'n Helen, ond oedd e'n y bedair thema arall hefyd, achos os yw bobl yn gallu defnyddio'r offer I ni'n rhoi iddyn nhw a'r prosesau, wedyn byddwn nhw'n gallu gwneud I job yn haws, heb o reidrwydd gorfod darllen y bath yn drylwyr o top i'r gwylod ac o un ochr i'r llall.
Diolch Iwan, diolch yn fawr.
Helen, I think you want to come in.
Yeah, just really to pick up on all of that, really. This goes to the heart of who we are as an organisation, isn't it? And our values and how we behave and how we role model all of that. So the whole, ethos of the organisation is about that transparency and that openness, and that goes to everything that we do in the organisation. And then really our staff, as Evan has said, really kind of sharing and talking about this stuff in the organisation. that it's not just an area that's reserved for board, and then there's a frantic kind of, collating of information to do it. Actually, we need to streamline it and see that kind of line of sight, that golden thread through all of the functions and processes that we've got in the organisation to make our ability to oversee this, but the way we operate, actually, it being able to report up to board where we are with the BAF actually should be quite a straightforward thing for us to undertake, shouldn't it? Because actually this is how we're operating and how we're doing business. But all of that really, for me, it strikes back to the values and the core of the organisation and the personality of the organisation. Who are we and how we operate? And I think that's something that we as a board have really focused in on, but actually more broadly with the wider organisation and with our stakeholders, to be honest, because we have very open and frank conversations quite often on numbers of topics, really. And I think the other point being that we welcome and are open to the challenge and the feedback, actually, both from within the organisation on any of the stuff that we're doing, and with the organisation really to take on board some of that positive feedback. But yeah, I just wanted to make that point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. Okay, I've just got one observation, Chris, and not for you to respond now, but maybe to have a think about, because as you mentioned, this is going to come to us on a twice-a-year basis, and we know in these key strategic risks what has happened from one 6-month report to the next. You might want to think about how you can capture a trend as well, because one would be particularly concerned about a risk that was going up and down rather than going in the remaining constant or going in the right direction. So maybe have a think about that. Thanks Chris and all the rest of the team for that. That was, as people have said, it was a very clear explanation about what has brought us to this stage, what has brought us to this type of way of presenting it, and drawn out some the key elements of the assurance framework, and this is going to be critical for us as a board going forward in informing us and supporting our ability to seek assurance that things are going as they should. So can I thank everyone who presented, and also everyone who's contributed to the discussion. It was a very rich discussion, I think, in the context of a very important part of a board's role. So thank you all. Okay, if we move on then, and now we're going into the strategic procurement report. Now I'm going to invite Ivan to introduce, and I believe Ivan will be joined by Michelle for this, the Director of Planning and Performance and Chief Commercial Lead, to be part of the presentation of the strategic procurement report. Ivan, we're in your hands.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Cadeirydd. Fi sydd yn noddi'r papur yma. Ond wy'n falch iawn bod Michelle yn ymuno gyda ni i gyflwyno'r papur. Hi yw'n prif swyddog masnachol ni. Wy'n mynd i basio'r bel yn gyflym iawn i'w diogel hi iddi hi gyflwyno, a hefyd i gymryd unrhyw gwestiynau sydd yn dilyn lan, oni bai bod hi wrth gwrs eisiau pasio fe'n ymlaen at rhywun arall sydd ar y bwrdd.
Thank you, Ivan. Good morning. There are 3 contracts that I'm presenting for the formal approval of the board this morning, so I'll take them one at a time. And I'm just going to call out some key points from the detailed report for colleagues. So the first contract relates to the dental e-referral management system. So this is a system that we originally commissioned back in 2018 to manage the referral of patients from our kind of general dental practices, just over 500 of those in Wales, into specialist services. And those specialist services are provided by a range of providers across Wales. So the contract we're proposing to award is to Referral Management Services, aptly named. It's a 4-year contract with the opportunity to extend for a further 2 years. Referral Management Services are actually the current providers of this system, and are therefore being reappointed as a result of a competition that we conducted as an open procurement in accordance with the procurement regulations. They were actually formerly known as FDS Consultants. So this is quite an interesting one, I think, a system that was developed by a consortium of dental and medical consultants actually in the northwest of England, and has now been taken forward and established as a limited company and rebranded as Referral Management Services. So as I said, they have successfully delivered in Wales since 2018, which has enabled us to streamline the referral process and also achieve a number of other benefits. There's an aspect of clinical triage in the process as well to ensure that patients are being referred to the appropriate specialists or being treated at the appropriate level, as well as quite a lot of additional performance data that we've been able to use to refine those services going forward. So that's our first contract, and I'm seeking formal approval from the board. It has been, the procurement has been run by our in-house team with a specialist evaluation team, and we have notified Welsh Government of our intention to make the award, which they duly noted on the 16th of May.
Should we take them one by one as normal,
Yes.
Michelle? Yeah, okay. Any questions or people happy to approve that? Yep, you've got the approval there, Michelle.
Thank you. So I'll move on to the second one. So the second one relates to some new networking equipment for our replacement data center 2. So I'll just cover that a little bit, so confusing parts in the text. So as colleagues in the board will be aware, we've recently moved into one new data center. This is the other data center, and we're looking at the replacement plan for that over the next year. That said, we need to look at replacement to the networking, and we are planning to modernize the network in the same way that we have for our other new data center. You'll note we've got quite a long lead time on this, and that's because again, we are experiencing some difficulties in securing equipment. This is an international problem in terms of some of the IT equipment that we need to order. And we've been advised by the manufacturers that we could be looking at quite a significant lead time. So you'll note that we've allowed a year in order to source this equipment, and at the moment that feels like a realistic estimate in terms of how long it could take us to actually take receipt of this. So we've built some time into that to make sure that we've got that in place before our current support arrangements expire. So it's a 3-year contract with a 2-year extension. Just to note, the period of the contract relates to the warranties for the equipment. So as and when the equipment is actually received, that's when we would expect the warranties to start. So depending on that point, we will be looking at that specific term to ensure that that aligns with the equipment, if that makes sense, so that we have a 3-year initial warranty period and still retain that option to extend for a further 2 years should we wish to do so. The value on that is just under 1.4 million. And that has also been notified to Welsh Government that we're intending to make that award, and they duly noted our intention to do so on the 16th of May. So I'm now seeking the board's approval.
Thank you, Michelle. Any questions? I hope we're in when it arrives. Any questions on that one? People happy to approve? Yep, thank you. Moving on to the last one, Michelle.
I'm sure Gareth will ensure we're definitely in when it arrives, won't you, Gareth, where it comes. So the third one is probably may take a little bit more focus, I think, and hopefully colleagues will see why. So this is our Microsoft Enterprise Agreement. So this is in effect a 3-year pricing agreement with Microsoft to secure the range of licenses that we use across healthcare delivery in Wales. And those licenses, I think it would be fair to say, have become a really key aspect of the tool set that we use, right across the healthcare delivery landscape. And that varies from the kind of very recognizable products, I guess, for folks such as ourselves in terms of things like email, Teams, we've certainly become very reliant on, but also the underlying software that supports quite a lot of our infrastructure. So our clinical products as well that are used by a significant number of users across Wales. So Digital Health and Care Wales leads the discussion or the negotiations with Trustmarque in order to put this agreement in place. And the agreement is on behalf of the whole of NHS Wales. And the main reason we do that is by acting in that way, we can effectively present ourselves as a single customer or a single tenancy in Microsoft terms, which allows us to really maximize the price, frankly, and the value that we get. So the additional services that we can secure as well. So pleased to say our Director of Finance, Claire, actually led this for us. So if you've got any difficult questions on numbers, I'll point to Claire in a minute. But joking aside, no, Claire led an All Wales licensing management group with representatives, as I said, from our healthcare delivery partners across Wales. And we've had a number of months of quite detailed assessment and negotiation in order to reach this point. The agreement, just to be clear, is actually executed through Trustmarque. So Trustmarque are our appointed Microsoft license reseller. So we appointed them through a competitive process back in 2019, and we actually contract through Trustmark, but against a pricing agreement that we have reached directly with Microsoft. And this is pretty much the standard way of engaging with Microsoft, I'd have to say. And as I've indicated, by entering into this kind of pricing agreement, we can actually get quite significant benefits. And I think the team have done an excellent job in driving the maximum benefit from this agreement, I would have to say. So a couple of other things I just wanted to point out. So I've mentioned earlier, we are entering into this agreement as a statutory body, but on behalf of the other healthcare delivery partners in Wales. So there are 19 of us, including Dhcw. And the commitment to spend obviously comes from us for our specific requirements, which are relatively small actually in the entire quantum, but also obviously important from the board's perspective that we got the commitment of all of those other organisations, because the pricing in the agreement is predicated on a minimum level of commitment. So Claire, again, has managed that through the All Wales licensing group. And I think, Claire, you've also had a number of discussions with directors of finance and indeed directors of digital to make sure that the organisations are up to speed. And then a detailed briefing paper has been sent out to each of the organisations, setting out very clearly the process that we've been through, the overall deal, and particularly their specific commitment. And the organisations have been asked to provide that specific commitment back to this organisation, so that we've got that clarity, if you like, that pass through, that those specific sums will be picked up by those organisations. And they are managing that in parallel with this process, as I understand it, through their own governance procedures, as we would expect. So we've asked that they respond to Claire at the latest by the end of this month. The agreement is predicated on all organisations signing up. And we wouldn't expect to take any action in terms of executing the agreement or moving forward, unless and until we've received all of those confirmations back to Claire. So that's one of the assurance. I imagine then, Claire, that Claire will pick that up with you, Simon, then as the chair, to ensure that we've got all of those commitments in place before we actually then execute the agreement on behalf of those separate statutory bodies. So the other thing I'm just going to mention briefly is in the numbers. There's quite a lot of detail in the report, and in the commitment under the report. So you'll notice the number at the top of the paper is a maximum expenditure value. That is not the value that we are proposing to commit to today. The committed value on behalf of all the organisations across Wales is 147 million, excluding VAT, assuming that we take up the full 5-year period. So we have a break point after 3 years, but we have the option to take up a full commitment to 5 years. So that is the total value that we are committing to today. And as I said, it's a minimum commitment value. So that is made up of about 140 million in the core licenses, as they're defined through the agreement. And then what the pricing agreement then sets pricing values against a range of other products that the health boards may choose to call off or not, depending on their specific requirements. So about £7 million then on top of that, it relates to the specific bundle of services that the health boards, trusts or other bodies have already indicated that they are anticipating calling off in year 1 of the agreement. So there's some variability there. You'll notice then spot the obvious point, there's some variability then at the top of the maximum value that allows us to call off further services should we wish to do so. From the perspective of Digital Health and Care Wales, probably worth noting conversations we've been having in previous boards and discussions about the Azure hosting capabilities potentially. So these are Microsoft products that we've been discussing, and that's a potential direction of travel for us specifically in terms of how we want to take some of our solutions forward. And those would be priced under this agreement, but would be items that we could call off over and above the initial committed value. I think the other point to point out is that as well as the bundle of services, we made a decision in this current year of service to increase the security functions that we have in this product set. So in response to the heightened kind of cyber risks, and I think hopefully particularly important for members of the public, that those security functions protect the continuity of service, which is obviously important in terms of our service delivery, but also we've got enhanced measures around protection of the data and the information that we're holding on behalf of the public of NHS Wales. So that's an additional investment that's was made and has been added to the bundle of services. And actually we've been able to, I think, negotiate a better position with Microsoft, because those were part of the baseline, if you like, when we went into the conversations this year. So those are the kind of key level details. Really, I think from my perspective, as I said, it's a 3-year agreement. We do have the option to run forward for a further 2. We have advised Welsh Government of our intention to enter into this agreement on behalf of NHS Wales, and they have duly noted our intention to do so also on the 16th of May. So there was quite a lot of activity for us from Welsh Government on the 16th of May, which is helpful and very timely in advance of the board today. So just to be very clear, I'm seeking the consent of the board to action the award, subject to receiving the confirmation from all of the committed bodies that they are also committing through their appropriate governance processes to their aspects of the agreement.
Yeah. Ifan, you want to come in?
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. Wel, gyntaf, ga I just diolch i Michelle am gyflwyno rhywbeth mor gymleth, mor eglur. O'n i'n sôn yn gynt ynglyn â bod yn dryloyw. Mae yna lot fawr yn y contract yma, a yn cyrraedd oedd hwnna'n ardderchog o ran cyflwyniad. Wi eisiau diolch i'r tîm masnachol am y gwaith maen nhw wedi gwneud ar hwn, a hefyd y tîm cyllid a Cle a'r gymuned cyllid ar draws NHS Cymru. A pethau wi eisiau tynnu mas yn benodol, un yw just y graddfa fan hyn, pa mor fawr yw'r contract, a mae hwnna'n dangos pa mor bwysig yw digidol ar draws NHS Cymru, a faint o fuddsoddiad sydd angen dros y blynyddoedd nesaf er mwyn i ni sicrhau bod ni'n gallu parhau i ddarparu gwasanaethau ar dros y system. Yn ail, sut i ni wedi defnyddio yr ail negodi hyn i ymestyn rhywfaint o'r gwasanaeth i ni prynu oddi wrth Microsoft mewn i ardaloedd Cyber a diogelwch trwy Microsoft Defender, a hefyd troi data mewn i wybodaeth trwy Power Platform, Power BI a phethau tebyg, a hefyd, fel oedd Michelle yn sôn, symud i'r cwmwl, y Microsoft Azure a phethau tebyg. Mae hwn yn dangos sut mae yna gysylltiad rhwng yr holl bethau gwahanol ni'n gwneud, a sut ni'n eleinio'n strategol ar draws y sefydliad. Ac yn olaf, y cydweithio agos iawn gyda'r cyrff eraill ar draws NHS Cymru. Mae bob cyfarwyddwr digidol yng Nghymru, mae bob cyfarwyddwr cyllid yng Nghymru wedi bod yn rhan o'r broses yma, wedi bod yn broses ddwys iawn dros y misoedd diwethaf. Mae'n jyst yn dangos sut mae'r NHS yng Nghymru yn gallu cydweithio yn agos iawn, yn gyflym iawn ac yn effeithiol iawn. A trwy wneud hynny, sicrhau telerau ac amodau ffafriol i ni yng Nghymru drwy weithio gyda'n gilydd er mwyn bod yn gwsmer llawer iawn mwy pwysig. So mae yna lot fawr o waith ardderchog wedi mynd mewn i hyn. A wy'n ddiolchgar iawn i pawb sydd wedi bod yn rhan o'r broses.
Thank you, Ifan. Anyone else want to come in? I mean, perhaps I echo Ivan's comments there. I mean, it's been a huge piece of work, which has clearly ended in a result that is particularly favourable for Wales. And absolutely critical for business continuity and delivering so much of what is delivered on a day-to-day basis by within NHS Wales. And when I read the papers, I started doing some maths and gave up because the noughts became too great when I thought, how big is the Wales NHS in the context of health systems across the world? And then you started adding it up and realizing you should have bought Microsoft shares 20 years ago. So thank you all for the team involved in this, a great result. Thanks very much, Michelle, for a very clear presentation on a very complex contract procurement. People content to approve subject to the criteria that Michelle set out around health boards signing up. Yep. Lovely. If in that case, then thank you very much, Michelle. We will now break for just over 10 minutes and we'll reconvene at midday. Thank you all. If you could turn your cameras off and microphones off whilst you're having a break. Welcome back, everyone. Here comes Marion. Okay, I think we'll make a start on the next part of the board meeting, and we're moving into part 6, the governance, risk, performance and assurance section of the meeting. And I'll hand straight over to Claire for the finance report. And I think you're using some slides as well, aren't you, Claire?
I am, thank you, Chair. Whilst those slides are going to be shown, I just wanted to reflect. This has been quite a busy time for us in the finance team over the last 2 months, really. From an NHS Wales perspective, the team have helped contribute to the finalisation of the Microsoft deal. They've also, at the same time, developed insight into the 10-year development plan for digital for the whole of Wales, and working very closely with the directors of digital to really get underneath that. And at the same time, it's year end, so we've been working closely with our Welsh audit colleagues to finalise the accounts for the first time, which, as you can imagine, has been quite enlightening, but also quite busy. We've also sat and deployed the budgets across Dhcw for the forthcoming financial year. And at the same time, we've been spending a lot of time together with the directors of finance, but also with our Welsh Government colleagues, and I'll touch on that later, in really crystallising our Digital Priorities Investment Fund for the forthcoming year. So as you can imagine, this has been quite a peak in our activity throughout the year, and I would like to formally thank my team who have worked hard to enable all of that to be undertaken. Okay, that's enough said there. So what I'm going to talk you through now is really just to summarise where we were from the year end. That position hasn't changed, but I'll talk you through that. I'll then talk you through this financial year and to highlight where we are in the first month, and pick out some of the key aspects of revenue and capital which you need to be aware of. And then finally update you with the way forward, what we'll be doing over the forthcoming months, and ask for some recommendations and comment. Okay, if we can move to the next slide then. And the next one. Okay, so as we had our board development session on the 5th of May, and also we had the audit committee this week on the 24th of May, which went into a bit more detail around this the numbers behind this, but I can confidently say that we've achieved all our statutory requirements for the first year for Dhcw. That means that we broke even. We actually outturned with a revenue position of 366,000, which was in line with our projection and slightly above where we thought we would outturn at 350. Our capital, we managed to invest nearly £11 million in capital, and again we were 10,000 behind that, and we achieved our PSPP, which is our public sector pay policy, of 97%. I think our overall, including our external policy, was around about 84. So there's some improvement that we was picked up on in the audit committee that we'll focus on in the forthcoming year. And our cash target, yeah, we made it. We made the target sent to us by Welsh Government of 2 million, and we undershot that by £500,000. So what does that mean? Just to summarise, Dhcw invested 14.4 million in Digital Priority Fund revenue last year. It also supported by £11.7 million worth of spend within the COVID activities. And as I already alluded to, we invested 11 million in digital schemes from a capital perspective. So a great start to really for NHS Wales in terms of the digital profile. So if we move to the next slide. So first year done, what does our second year look like? So for the forthcoming year, we've set the budgets and allocated them all to the directorates, who will then divide those down into the budget holders to ensure control and grip. So the first month, if we look at the first month, which is the next slide, again, it's looking green. It's looking good start to the year, and again that we've achieved what we set out to achieve in the first month. which is to comply with our statutory requirements in terms of our revenue spend. We are slightly below plan in terms of 37 million in terms of revenue. Capital, we spent 180,000, and I'll show you where we spent that shortly. Our public sector pay was at 98%, and our cash balances reduced, and they're now at 0.3 million. Those will change quite significantly, I would hope, over the next 2 months, as we will be paying Microsoft in the 1st of July, all being well with the contract. So we'll see a significant increase in cash as health boards and trusts submit their submissions to us to enable us to do that in July. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Okay, this is showing our run rate. So when we look at pay, when we look at our spend, we classify it into pay and non-pay. Pay is the dark blue, non-pay is the light blue. And this, the red box is where we are, but it actually tries to project where we think we would be over the forthcoming year. Again, it was following recommendations from the audit committee actually to ensure that we do highlight this aspect of the spend. What is important to note is in the first quarter, and you'll see this in the next slide when we get to it, is that the pay is somewhat lower because we've assumed that we will save money as a result of a high vacancy level. So of the first quarter of the year, in our plan, we've assumed a high vacancy factor because we knew with the recruitment pipeline that those positions will not be filled until later in the year. And that really influences our next slide. If we move to the next slide. Oh, sorry. So this one is the core activity. So we were 37 underspent, which is the red box at the far right. And again, this shows where, with the directorates, where that underspent was felt. And again, it reflects very much a similar pattern as we saw in the previous year, whereby certainly within my team, in finance business assurance, but also in strategy and development, there are still a number of vacancies that we need to recruit to. But equally within ICT, we are starting to see the pressures around cloud and other aspects of spend that, again, together with Gareth over the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking into to understand fully how we support that going forward in the next financial year. So if we move to the next slide. So this is the one that shows our savings plan. So we have a requirement to save £2.4 million over the forthcoming year. We will aim to have at least half of that if we can as recurrent. So that means that once we've saved, we will save those indefinitely. But as you can see, most of those will be non-recurrent, and they reflect really the vacancy position, particularly in the first few months of the year. So in April, we anticipated we would save 410,000 because of vacancies, and we did, and actually we overshot that, and that's what that previous graph showed us, that in 3 areas, they were still higher than we had initially planned. And again, there are other areas that we're tackling. Certainly working from home has enabled us to really reduce our travel and expenses and facilities costs. But equally, we're looking at contractual savings as part of this process as well. So that's our savings plan. And if we move on to the next slide. Our COVID response still remains very active, particularly in the vaccine aspects. So we've got and had approved our COVID spend for the forthcoming year. The total spend is shown in those boxes with the dark blue representing what we spent to date. And as you can see, both in TTP and vaccine, there is still a significant level of spend. Again, it was in line with plan. And heavily driven by the licensing levels. But again, something through the digital partnership group we share and analyse on a monthly basis. And I think it's true to say, in light of some of the aspects, we are now looking at whether there's potential to reduce that savings going forward, depending on the level of activity we see in this going forward in the first quarter. So that's our COVID response. And if we move on to the next one. Digital Priorities Investment Fund. So if you recall, I mentioned we spent nearly £14 million last year in this area. This has been an area of focus in the last couple of weeks, particularly in light of the Welsh Government requirement to reduce, certainly within the capital area, that allocation for the whole of Wales for the forthcoming year. So Very late in March, we were asked to look at the total fund for capital is 25 million. They've now reduced that for the forthcoming year to 10, and the revenue remains at around 50 million. This is showing our revenue spend, and it actually shows the high level of spend really in the key areas that we focused in our IMTP around the National Data Resource, the Centre of Excellence for Office 365, Digital Medicine, WCCIS. So yeah, and again, broadly in line with our plans. But what we have had to do is work very closely with the Welsh Government team to understand the impacts of that reduction and work with them to ensure really that we get the right balance in terms of the distribution of that reduction, but equally to mirror the priorities that we foresee as a group should be met in the forthcoming year. And I think I'm happy to say that over the last week, and together with the digital peer group, we've come to a balanced plan that has to go to the Minister. So it will be submitted to the Minister within the next week. And I'm confident then that we will be able, that there'll be minimum disruption to DHCW from that respect. Okay, if we move on to the next slide. Capital performance. So again, as you can see from this, we've got a high discretionary allocation of just short of 2 million. This is lower than last year because we had 3 million last year, again representing that underlying reduction across all NHS within the capital budgets. And actually, we just touched on this. This would be where the network spend and commitment would show in the forthcoming years, forthcoming months, as that procurement progresses. So that's where that spend will fall out in the DHCW plan. Again, you can see really that's the key area of focus for us, is in that area, but CANISC and the National Data Resources follow quite high behind that. Again, I am pretty confident now that the work that we've done with Welsh Government will ensure that those will be covered going forward in the next financial year. Okay, next slide. Okay, and we might touch on this a bit later because I know we'll see this in the risk report. But I have acknowledged through the DataX report quite a number of financial risks, and I think this echoes the current national environment in terms of inflationary pressures and the impact it may have on us as an organisation. There are two exceptional costs that I've identified, one related to energy and the other related to the national insurance increase. Again, Helen and I both submitted an accounting officer letter towards the back end of last financial year indicating to Welsh Government that we couldn't absorb those costs as DHCW. We weren't alone, and Welsh Government have acknowledged that, and we will be reporting those separately, and they will be taken as a central risk and not form a risk for DHCW. Having said that, the uncertainty around those prices, certainly within the energy market, still remain uncertain. So I think it's good to keep them on the radar and also to remind us about the impact that might have on us as an organisation. Again, during the month, as I alluded to, we were having quite a challenging conversation around the DPIF budget and the budget setting. And we did, on the initial discussions, feel that there would be a risk to the DHCW DPIF programme for this financial year. I think that risk will be downgraded following our work that we've undertaken, and particularly following the conversations we had with the directors of Digital Peer Group and with Welsh Government yesterday. And we'll be looking forward for confirmation of that from the funding letters from the Minister in the forthcoming weeks. Two other risks, though, that I want to flag in. One was the data centre migration. So we've talked about this, and we've alluded to it in our strategic procurement plan, the need to re-procure the data centre. Depending on that re-procurement will depend on the impacts of the financial ask. So Gareth and I will be working closely, and we already are in this space, but it's really trying to understand what the cost implications could be if we would have to move to a different location and what that might mean for us, particularly with the backdrop of shortage of available funds, particularly from the DPIF fund to do that, because that did fund our previous move. So again, we've recognised that risk, and we'll be looking to understand the true impact of that as that procurement process takes course. And finally, one that really reflects, again, some of the conversations we've had about digital inflation. There are two aspects to this. One is actually there are supply chain issues. Again, we mentioned that on the lead time for the network requirements as part of the NDC move, but equally prices. We've had quite, it was a challenging negotiation with Microsoft, as you could imagine. That's not alone. Licensing cost pressures are increasing. And equally, digital inflation is having an impact. In fact, as just before we joined this call, Gareth was talking about potential other areas that he'd seen where there are potential increases in this area. So I think it's important to note that, yeah, there is general inflation pressures across the industry at the moment, from energy, food, and various others. Digital is not alone. We are seeing similar aspects of that, and we should recognise that risk and work through what that risk potentially could be to inform our budgets for next year and the implications that might have for us as an organisation. So it's not all risk. There are opportunities, although my opportunities aren't necessarily Helen's, because she will always counter-argument this, but the vacancy position does create a financial opportunity. Ideally, we would like those people in position so we've got more fuel in the tank, but from a financial perspective, there is a silver lining. And again, I would say that we, with the less loosening of the restrictions on COVID, we've actually still adopt quite a hybrid way of working, and that has enabled us to significantly reduce our travel and expenditure spends. And again, that will have a benefit for us going forward. Okay, if we move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so the other things to note is we're finalising the accounts, and key dates ahead will be the audit committee on the 14th of June, and then the final board approval of those accounts, and then they have to be returned and submitted to Welsh Government on the 15th. We are finalising our work with Welsh Audit Office as we speak, and we look to conclude that next week before the end of this month. The feedback so far has been very positive. And let's hope over the last few days nothing else crops up, but it's very positive. We are being very open and transparent with the approach that we're taking with the audit, and obviously taking on board any observations they may have. And then finally, as we already alluded to, we've been doing quite a lot of work around the Microsoft to finalise that, but also coordinate it across Wales through working closely with Deputy Directors of Finance, Directors of Finance, the digital peer group. And one of the key things there, I think, is the role that Dhcw has had together with the licensing group, which has had participation throughout Wales, which has really enabled us to understand the ask and to be very secure and clever, I think, to a certain extent in how we've then negotiated the contract. Okay, next slide, please. So I would like you to note the financial report and the forecast year-end achievement of the key financial targets. In particular, to say that to see the unaudited financial performance position as at the 31st of March, to understand and see the April position for Dhcw, to see that we're still forecasting that we will break even at the end of the year, but we have highlighted a couple of risks, also a couple of opportunities, particularly around DPIF, but as I've already alluded to, I think we've got to a position there, and really to thank you for your help in terms of the Microsoft agreement and getting that over the line. So I think that is it in terms of slides, and I'm happy now to take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Claire. I have one, but I wait for anyone else's hand to go up. David.
Thanks, and thanks, Claire, for the clarity of the presentation, and thanks again for all of the hard work in getting our first set of accounts over the line and juggling all of the challenges you've just alluded to on the presentation. So thank you for that. I've just got one minor point, really. I note the work that you've done to try and mitigate the risk around DPIF funding. Could I just ask a clarification? Does that apply both to our planned revenue spend and to our planned capital spend?
Yes, it applies to both. And it was not just DHCW, it was the whole of Wales that was impacted. But yes, from a DHCW perspective, we've resolved that risk.
Excellent, great. I was hoping that was the case, but I just wanted reassurance. Thank you.
That's okay. I think the other point to note is we've resolved that for this financial year. I think the issue will be, this is an investment fund and it's multi-year. So I think the challenge for us will be, we've resolved the position for this year, the work that we now need to do to really secure that pipeline for the next year and forthcoming years. And that's the challenge now.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Claire. Okay, well, Claire probably knows what I'm going to raise because I've had the conversation with her before. I get very nervous when we're achieving cost improvements through staff vacancies. I've been there before. I mean, in one sense, we're in a better position than many health organizations because we started from a blank sheet of paper last year. So we're entirely sighted on where our non-recurrent savings are. And for two reasons. One, our key risk is filling. We want to be, putting the foot on the gas and filling all those vacancies as fast as possible. And two, anything done non-recurrently this year will just get added to the bill next year, our invoice next year. So I think we just need to get some assurance that we are aware of the not exactly substantial, what's the word I'm struggling for? I mean, aware of the issue around relying on non-recurrent. I know it potentially makes you happy as a finance director, Claire, in terms of the end of year, but also I think we need to be, as a board, pretty well cited on that work is going on to address the issue, because it will just heaps misery on misery each year.
Yeah, so there's two answers to this one, and one I like and one I don't. So the first answer to this is that yes, although our vacancies are high, and yes, it does help in terms of the funding and savings plan, to mitigate that, actually, we're working more closely now with third-party suppliers. As you know, through the board, we've procured agreements with those to temporarily, until we get that recruitment level to where it needs to be, to support the underlying operations and delivery of the organisation. So that's what we're doing alongside that, the recruitment task force to enable us to deliver on our IMTP requirements. I do echo the fact that we do need to have the balance between recurrent savings and non-recurrent savings, and they are really tough to find. Having said that, I think that's the challenge now for the non-pay group that we have within DHCW to really look at, to start working ahead really and think strategically, how can we have plans in place that don't cut around the edges, but actually provide us with that. And the other bit I would echo is really about the sustainable funding position. And we talk about this a lot. The other part is being able to pass on the value we create through either benefits that are funded or through the SLA agreements with health boards and trusts, so they recognise that and accept the costs, and being much sharper in understanding our product costs and our service costs and reflecting those in the income that we charge. But equally, I think it's also having that difficult conversation with Welsh Government. Digital is a fundamental aspect of the way that we deliver healthcare in Wales, and we need to ensure that we have a level of funding that reflects that, our ability to deliver that in a safe and sustainable way. So we've got quite some work to do in this space, and I think as the organisation now starts to grow and understand that in a much more comprehensive way, we can start to have those conversations.
Thanks, Claire. Ruth.
Diolch, and thanks to Claire and team for all the work on this. I think Claire largely made the point I was going to make at the end there. I think, Simon, this comes back to us thinking about what's our 10-year horizon and where's our planning going, because we cannot, I mean, I can't overstate it enough. You can't underestimate how much investment is needed for us to be able to deliver, to reach our vision of providing better services for people in Wales and all of the things that need to be done. You know, even if we're talking about a basic level of achievement, that's still out with the money that we've probably got at the moment. So, we do have to be quite strong about this. We have to be quite clear about this, and we have to really understand what our 10-year horizon looks like, and then be able to have those difficult conversations. Because if we don't, we'll just be trapped in a cycle of trying to make savings every year, which is we're not going to be able to progress even the day-to-day operations that we need to on that basis. So I think I'd just reiterate that last point that Claire made.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, and we have got a job of work to do. I mean, we're here this year with cost improvement targets, with then a hit as a result of the DPIF changes that Claire has just gone through. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but a recovery plan that doesn't identify a single dedicated pound spend on digital. So clearly we've got a job of work to do, which is to turn action, and action that's manifests itself in funding and sustainable funding, to turn commitments and priority and those natures of words into hard resource. Absolutely, Ruth, big job of work to be done. And I don't think there's anyone around the table who would not echo that view. But it's important that it's as a matter of record, I think, for us as an organisation that we identify that as a key priority for us. Any other comments or questions on the finance report? If not, we're happy to do all the things you asked us to do, Claire. Rather than me reiterate, go through that list. Thank you.
Okay, thank you,
Claire. If we move on then to the integrated organisational performance report, and Ivan's going to introduce this, and I think he's been joined by Michelle again to present the report. Ivan, over to you.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. Mae'n anghywir, ond mae Michelle yn gwisgo het wahanol, felly mae'n cyflwyno'r eitem hon fel cyfarwyddwr cynllunio a pherfformiad DHCW, nid fel prif swyddog masnachol am yr eitem ddiwetha. Mae'r adroddiad yma i'w drafod. Mae fe'n adroddiad sydd yn gyfarwydd i chi fel aelodau o'r bwrdd, i'r rheini sydd yn gwylio bob sesiwn o'r bwrdd cyhoeddus, a mae fe hefyd yn ddogfen i ni'n defnyddio yn fewnol yn weithredol trwy'r bwrdd rheoli sydd gyda ni. Mae yna lot fawr o wybodaeth yn yr adroddiad. Mae rheina yn y papurau ar gyfer y cyfarfod heddiw. Mae yna bapur clawr, bydd Michelle yn arwain chi trwy rhai o'r uchafbwyntiau ar y papur clawr. Does na ddim byd i'w godi yn ffurfiol fel escalation i'r bwrdd heddiw. A mae'r adroddiad yn edrych ar y 2 fis diwethaf, felly mis Mawrth, diwedd y flwyddyn ariannol diwethaf, a mis Ebrill, felly ni'n gynnar iawn mewn i'r flwyddyn eleni. Felly na drosglwyddo i Michelle, bydd hi'n dod â rhai o'r cydweithwyr, rhai o'r cyfarwyddwyr eraill mewn fel sy'n briodol, a wedyn gobeithio bydd amser am gwestiynau ar y diwedd.
Thank you, Ivan. Yeah, I'm just going to pull out a couple of key points. Obviously, colleagues have been able to review the detail in the report. And as you say, respective leads around the table may want to come in on particular aspects in which they lead on the performance. So the key things I just wanted to note really, and you mentioned it there, Ivan, we're in a kind of interim phase, particularly in terms of the plan. So obviously we've got the end of March, which was against our annual plan for 21-22. And there's a little bit in the report about that, just to finish off that period really. And then obviously the board approved the integrated medium-term plan then, which covers this year and the following 2 years. And that was duly approved at the end of March and submitted to Welsh Government. So we've had some initial conversation with Welsh Government about that, with the Welsh Government planning team and a few policy colleagues, and we're expecting a formal response back in early June. So we're anticipating that we're on track currently with the IMTP, but obviously subject to formal agreement from Welsh Government. So what you will see in the report, we've got a bit of both. We've got the plan on a page, which hopefully colleagues will recognise that we've reported against for the last year. And you can see on there, we've tried to summarise the end position, if you like, the end of the 12 months and the achievement position, and also a number of initiatives that we would have discussed when we were looking at our IMTP, in fact, that have carried forward or moved forward intentionally into this financial year now. There's also a bit of a summary of the key achievements. So again, we've reflected achievements as we've gone through the year. I think I would certainly like to recognise the significant progress that colleagues have made in the last year, and as we've commented on within the board, that was against a backdrop where we've still been kind of prioritising resource really and reflecting our COVID response. So that's clearly impacted the last 12 months. And will have been incorporated to a degree into our plan for this year as well. So we will be working up the achievements, particularly to produce a separate achievements report, and you will also see in our annual report, actually we've got quite a lot of those achievements set out so that they people can understand what we delivered. And that was obviously against our 11 portfolios last year, so spot the subtle change. When you go to page 9, you will see the plan on a page again that we agreed as part of the IMTP. So that's the really high level plan for this year with our 12 portfolios now. And submitted to Welsh Government. And the other thing I just wanted to say on that then is we have been working on how we will present performance against that plan going forward to be really clear and helpful for the board, but also everyone else externally who may be interested in terms of how we are progressing against the delivery of our objectives. And we have been working on that with our management team, and also again thanks to David and Rowan, who've provided some input from an independent member perspective in terms of what would be helpful. So I anticipate we'll be reporting on a quarterly basis of delivery against plan, and I would expect that to be in an updated format the next time that I bring that to the board. So I'm just going to pick up then a couple of things in terms of the scorecard. So we're reporting 2 ambers in the scorecard. So those are areas where we're falling below the required level of performance. So one of those relates to PDRs. And I'm really pleased that Sarah Jane is with us now as our new Director of People. I'm going to hand over to Sarah Jane in a minute, perhaps just to pick up on a couple of the workforce issues, because not just PDRs, but obviously, as we've noted a number of times today even and in previous meetings, recruitment and our focus on workforce is particularly key as we move forward. So I will hand over in a moment to Sarah Jane, who leads on that for us. And the other one just to pick up is the service desk. And again, colleagues will be aware, the service desk have done an awful lot of work actually around customer satisfaction and raising the level of service that we provide across a broad range of service users. I think we have looked at that in terms of the impact there. So it's fallen just below the target that we set, having been consistently high in the past. So they're a bit disappointed in the service desk. I think what we have seen there is a couple of specific factors. So they've had some staff absences due to COVID and other reasons. And we've got a mixed blessing on the service desk. I think that it's proved to be quite an effective recruitment channel into the organisation. So folks come and join the service desk team, they learn about the organisation. It's a really good grounding, I think, for people to really understand about what we do and how we support the wider NHS, and to get to know some of our users. But it does mean that some people are quite successfully then transitioned into other roles in the organisation. So we're also looking at that in terms of how we can recognise that and take best advantage of that, really, to create a deliberate pipeline perhaps into the organisation and help the service desk itself with their capacity. But these were the key points. Happy to take any questions, but I would just like to bring in Sarah Jane, if that's okay, Chair, to perhaps focus a bit more on some of the workforce aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, I think in terms of recruitment, and we've had a discussion about this in a number of fora today, we're doing a piece of work at the moment on developing the workforce and OD strategy. And in terms of future years, I think we've got really good building blocks. We've got really good relationships, certainly across the workforce, the trade unions, the education sector, and a number of key stakeholders. But I think it's twofold, really. So in terms of that developing work on the strategy, which will come to board in due course, we also have the criticalities of this year's recruitment pressures, which, as we've heard described by Claire, are quite pertinent, really. So some of the things that I've been discussing with the team, and this will work through the organisation, is to look at some new innovative ways to resource, to contract, to bring people in, and indeed look at who's not quite making the cut. You know, are we supporting people with their applications? Are we supporting people with interview skills? So who didn't quite make it, but they've actually got the qualifications, skills, experience, aptitude, and as Michelle said, there's a variety of different routes. I think there's some further focus, which is linked also to my board champion role on this, in terms of looking at the veterans and seeing if we can work closer with the armed forces and look at sort of career pathways for them, as well as working really closely with the universities and colleges, and also looking at some of the disability groups across Wales as well. We're very underrepresented in that particular area on our equality and diversity, and it's looking at, now we've got the hybrid working in place, is there an opportunity to work with some of these groups to see if that could be something that we could be a really good employer of choice to a more diverse workforce. So there's a range of innovative things going on, both through the recruitment task force, work with my team and others, and looking at doing things slightly differently, because I think we do need to make a step change this year to recruit good people and volume in order to meet some of the projections that are in place. And there are some risks associated with not getting where we need to be in Q1 so far, although progress is being made. We've obviously got to make that step change, really. So there's lots of work in progress, and obviously as we go through the remainder of the year and at various quarters, and indeed other papers that come to board, I will obviously update and support, and indeed through my induction conversations with you, take on board your feedback and ideas in association with that. And also just to say, and I sort of prepared this for the earlier slot, it is my first board as well. So delighted that you brought me in, Michelle, and just to say thank you. And I'm really delighted to have joined the senior leadership team here in this capacity, and everyone's been very welcoming and supportive, and it's a very dynamic and exciting organisation to work in. So there's lots to do, but I'm up for the challenge, and I think, you know, myself, my team, and working with colleagues and the wider workforce and our internal and external stakeholders, I think we're going to make good inroads into a lot of these things that, you know, have made some good progress, but we just need to sort of put our foot down on the gas, so to speak. So looking forward to taking that forward with colleagues. Does anyone have any questions?
Sorry, I'm on mute. Thank you, Sarah Jane. Thank you, Michelle. I have a question, but there may be others. Gareth, I see, has got his hand up. Oh, over to you, Gareth.
Diolch, Chair. It's around performance reporting as a whole, and I don't want to take anything away from the report because I think it's a fabulous report, so thank you for delivering that, Michelle. But, and I think you've alluded to this, is with all of the things that we can performance manage and report on, how are we going to decide what is the right things to report on, and in what sense and in what detail? Because while it covers a vast array, there's things there that we don't perhaps report on or don't go into the detail of. So can you perhaps unpack that a little and decide in the future where we will make that baseline as to what performance reporting we should be doing?
Do you want to pick up that, Michelle or Ivan? Who's just up to you who takes it?
Do you want to start with that, Ivan, and I'll pick up?
Yeah, great. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Diolch am y cwestiwn, Gareth. Yeah, mae'n ddiddorol achos mae meddylfryd y Llywodraeth yn gosod fframwaith gynllunio gadarn i ni. Yn gynnar iawn yn y flwyddyn, mis Ionawr, mis Chwefror, rydyn ni'n sgwennu cynllun llawn am 2 blynedd, a mae'n perfformiad ni o safbwynt Llywodraeth yn cael ei fesur yn erbyn beth i ni wedi dweud ym mis Ionawr o Chwefror fyddwn ni'n gwneud am yr 15 mis nesaf. Fel corff digidol, mae rhaid i ni fod llawer iawn yn fwy hyblyg, mae eisiau ni ymateb i'r blaenoriaethau sydd o'n blaen ni, a mae yna dyndra rhwng y ddau beth na, achos mi fedrwn ni berfformio o safbwynt Llywodraeth drwy just gweud na i bob peth am flwyddyn, ond o ran perfformio fel corff digidol fydde hwnna peth anghywir i wneud. Wy'n credu bod y tîm wedi gwneud gwaith ardderchog yn cynnig at ei gilydd y cerrig milltir sydd gyda ni, fel bod gyda ni dealltwriaeth glir iawn o beth i ni'n anelu i ddilifro trwy'r flwyddyn. I ni'n adrodd ar hyn o bryd ar bethau fel pethau sydd wedi cyflawni nad oedden nhw yn y cynllun. A wy'n credu bod jyst rhaid i ni edrych am y 6 mis nesaf ar sut fedrwn ni helpu'r Llywodraeth i ddeall sut mae DHCW yn wahanol i fyrddau iechyd. A dim i weid nad yw'r rhamwaith cynllunio yn berthnasol i ni, wrth gwrs i fod e. Ond wy'n gwybod bod y Llywodraeth eisiau i ni fod yn gorff ystwyth ac yn gorff public digidol. Felly mae sy'n ni gael sgwrs gyda nhw, a mae hynna yn y dyddiadur dros yr 6 mis nesaf. Ni'n cwrdd â nhw'n gwarterol, a fyddwn ni'n cytuno sut i ni'n gwneud hynny, a sut i ni'n adrodd i'r bwrdd, fel bod ni'n gallu dod â hynna bas yn fwy eglur i roi'r sicrwydd i'r bwrdd bod ni yn cael y balans cywir rhwng y cynllun a ymateb i'r blaenoriaethau sydd o'n blaenau ni.
Very clear. Thank you, Ivan.
Thank you for that, Ivan. We're getting a little bit of people freezing. I don't know what. Hopefully everything's okay. But Grace, I know you've got your hand up. Oh, there we are. We got you back on screen as well. Lovely.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for this report. I just want to say thank you to Sarah Jane and welcome. I'm delighted that you've joined us. I know we have meetings in the diary, so I'm really looking forward to that. I also wanted to say thank you for your comments here on the diverse workforce. I think at DHCW, with the remit that we have and the goals that we have, we can't afford to exclude pools of talent. And you know, we wouldn't want to be excluding veterans, people serving our forces, or disabled people and disabled talent across Wales. And I think it's really, really glad to. I'm really glad to hear you be. You know, let's be really transparent about that and really make sure, are we unintentionally not reaching out or in some way putting barriers up? And you know, it's a huge issue. It's really, really important, and I'm really glad that we're hoping to be a part of changing that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. Anyone else have a question? I've got one. I mean, there's a reference in the paper to significant IT service incidents. Now, one person's significant is different from another person's significant, and significant to me raises sort of alarm bells. It would help to know what the continuum is and where significant is on that, and what we actually mean by significant, because at the moment I'd suggest there's probably a degree of ambiguity in there, isn't there, that we need to nail down. I don't know who wants to pick that up. Maybe you, Gareth, could answer that one.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. No, absolutely. And coming from an ITSM background, an IT service management background, we don't use the word significant, which actually means noteworthy, doesn't it? And a significant IT incident is probably a little bit more than noteworthy, perhaps. So we use the term major incident across the board. It's quite an international standard to use. The difficulty is within the NHS is they've already coined that term, and a major incident from an NHS point of view is an occurrence, excuse me, that presents serious threat to the health of the community or disruption to the service. So for us to use, and I give an example, quite recently there was in England a Southwest Trust who declared a major incident in the hospital. Now, reading that on the front page, goodness me, and you delve into it, and then a bit further down in the news, it talks about a major IT incident, which would then make you breathe and go, oh, crikey, well, that's okay then. So we need to be careful. I think you're right, Simon. It's a very good question that we need to look at that term significant and what does a major IT incident mean to us? And it may just be that within DHCW specifically, we just add the word IT. So we can have a major incident from an NHS point of view. We can have a major IT incident. So we adhere to the ITIL sort of standards for IT service management in that respect. But I think we've agreed, certainly within the exec team, only last week, that word was causing us significant concern, and that we should really look forward to address those terminologies within IT service management to see how we can use them. Because I don't think we could ask the NHS to drop the word major incident. I think that one's definitely taken. But it is on our forward plan to review that, Simon.
Thanks, because I mean, obviously, you can put a narrative around it in this forum, but the papers are the papers, aren't there?
Absolutely right.
You know, so that will be very helpful. Okay, thank you very much for that, everyone. Ivan, Michelle, and Sarah Jane. We'll move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is the corporate risk register. And without any further ado, I'll ask Chris to introduce this item. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. I'm just going to start this item where I started last month. I just remind board members of the publication of the World Economic Forum Global Risks Landscape 2022 that's been published relatively recently, and the increasing prominence of digital, particularly cyber risks from an international context that I think we should be aware of. Clearly, we operate within that landscape. But I went into a bit of detail last meeting. I won't repeat what I said. It's just the context, and I think probably worth noting in that context, the number of corporate cyber security risks have increased on our risk register. So I'm just going to work through where we are. So our corporate risk register currently has 22 risks on it, 13 of which are detailed in the risk register included within the papers. The other 9 are private risks, as mentioned, the majority cybersecurity related, so not in the public domain, but they are scrutinised at every digital governance and safety committee, and there was one recently where we reviewed those risks. I'd like to ask board members to note the changes in terms of the corporate risk register since our last meeting, or certainly over the last few months. We've had 8 risks added to the risk register. 2 of them were added in February to the private session. They haven't changed in terms of their risk score, and we've had 1 additional private risk added. That means there have been 5 additional public risks that have been added to the corporate risk register. Now, these are all under Claire's area of remit in terms of exec ownership, as she mentioned earlier through her finance report. So the increased utility cost, financial pressure, the unfunded national insurance increase, the digital priorities investment funding, the data center migration revenue funded, and the digital inflation. Now, this is important in the context of the risks that we've removed. So there are 8 risks that have been removed. So it's nice and symmetrical from the last time in terms of new risks and risks removed. But we talked at the last board meeting about our infrastructure investment risk in particular. And there was a bit of challenge around that one from Claire in terms of the capital requirement for legacy infrastructure replacement, which has been accommodated. So I think the additional financial risks that have been added on to some extent have spawned from that discussion around infrastructure investment, and actually things have moved on, and things like digital inflation are more of the cost pressures from a risk perspective that now sit within our corporate risk register. In terms of the corporate risk heat map, it's just worth pointing out the Canis risk continues to be our highest scoring risk. Helen mentioned earlier the Cancer Informatics Programme have agreed a new date now for the replacement of the Canis software, for Velindra being mid-November. So although that continues to be our highest scoring risk, a bit of clarity in terms of timeframes on that one. So I'm asking the board to note the changes on the risk register in terms of the 8 additional risks that have gone on, the 8 that have been removed. I think it's important to note the risk profile. So the financial pressures from the risks that Claire has alluded to during her presentation gives us a much more challenging position from a risk perspective financially. And as mentioned earlier, our cyber risks and the focus that we have on those. I will ask if Claire wants to add anything in terms of the additional risks that have been added, or if she's covered that through her report. But I just wanted to cover the risk management and board assurance framework milestone plan. This has been coming to board accompanying this report for the last 12 months. I'm pleased to say that all but 1 item now is amber, the rest are all green, with the board assurance framework now having come to board. So I'm hoping that we'll move all those items in terms of milestones we set as we established as an organisation to green. But just to give some assurance that clearly risk appetite, the focus on the board assurance framework and risk will continue to be programmed and planned into future board development and board meetings. It doesn't mean those things stop happening. It just means we haven't done them all for the first time. So instead of milestones, they become business as usual. So just check if Claire wants to highlight anything from the additional risks that have been added to the risk register over the last couple of months.
Thanks, Chris. I think I sort of alluded to those in the finance report, but I'm happy if anyone's got any further questions to pick those up.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions or comments on Chris's report? If not, oh, go on, Ruth.
Thanks, Simon. Diolch, Chris. Thank you for the report. I'll just make the point that I always make when we discuss private risks, in that at both digital governance and safety and the audit committee, when we talk about private risks, we regularly challenge whether those risks should actually remain private, or if in terms of transparency we're able to discuss more about them. So I think it's just worth making that point again here, that whilst it may feel like there's a lot of private risks on there, they are all well challenged to see whether we can either move them off, mitigate them, or bring them into the public realm. So just wanted to make that point. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Ruth. Important point. Okay. I think by the looking at people, Chris, then people are indeed happy to note your report. Thank you. Moving on then to an annual report, the Senior Information Risk Owner annual report. And I think, Gareth, you're going to introduce this item, and are we being joined by Carwyn for this item as well, I think?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the CIRO report, the Senior Information Risk Officer report, is an annual report to provide the board, the public, with assurance relating to the policies and procedures that DHCW as a special health authority has in place to manage information risks. So I will hand over the baton to our Director of ICT, Carwyn Lloyd-Jones. Thank you, Carwyn.
Diolch, Gareth. Right, I'll just to say I'll be doing this in report in Welsh, so I'll just gweud bod fi'n mynd i wneud hwnna'n Gymraeg. So llen fi ymlaen i'r sleid nesaf, os gwelwch yn dda. Reit, ar dyma'r agenda, byddwn ni'n mynd mewn, byddai'n trafod rhywfaint beth yw pwrpas yr adroddiad, y strwythurau sydd gyda ni sy'n berthnasol i reoli risg gwybodaeth, y prosesau sydd gyda ni sy'n ar ran goruchwylio, datblygiadau allweddol sydd wedi bod yn ystod y flwyddyn sy'n berthnasol wrth gwrs i hyn, archwiliadau yn ystod y flwyddyn, gweithgaredd sydd gyda ni wedi cynllunio dros y flwyddyn nesaf, a wedyn amser am unrhyw gwestiynau ar y diwedd. Sleid nesaf, please. Felly, pwrpas, so hwn yw'r adroddiad cyntaf o'r math yma i Iechyd a Gofal Digidol Cymru. Pwrpas yr adroddiad yw i roi sicrwydd ynghylch y polisïau a'r gweithdrefnau sydd gyda ni yn wneud a rheoli risgiau gwybodaeth. Yn benodol, cyflwyno dull rheoli risg gwybodaeth sydd gyda ni yn yr awdurdod, rhoi crynodeb o ddatblygiadau allweddol sy'n ymwneud â gwella rheoli risg gwybodaeth, gwybodaeth am yr archwiliadau perthnasol, gwybodaeth a data sy'n ymwneud â rheoli risg gwybodaeth, a wedyn sleid nesaf, gwelwch yn dda. So, o ran y strwythurau, mae strwythur gyda ni o fewn yr sefydliad i edrych ar ôl hyn i gyd. Yr swyddog atebol ar gyfer hwn yw ein prif swyddog gweithredol, yr Chief Executive, Helen. Yr uwch berchenog risg gwybodaeth, y CIRO, yw'r cyfarwyddwr gweithredol gweithrediadau, hynny yw Gareth. Ond gan fod Gareth yn newydd ymuno gyda Iechyd a Gofal Digidol Cymru, fi nath ysgrifennu'r adroddiad eleni, a felly fi sy'n cyflwyno, ond yn y dyfodol Gareth fydd yn gwneud hyn. So wedyn mae gyda ni y cyfarwyddwr meddygol gweithredol yw'r gwarcheidwad Caldicott. Mae'n gyfrifol am ddiogelu cyfrifnachedd y gwybodaeth iechyd sydd gyda ni. Mae gyda ni berchnogion asedau gwybodaeth, a nhw sy'n gyfrifol am yr asedau sydd gyda ni, a bydd hwn yn y gofrestr asedau gwybodaeth. A hefyd mae gyda ni swyddog diogelu data fel rhan o'r GDPR, ac mae gydag ef i dîm llywodraethu gwybodaeth sydd yn helpu fe. Ac wrth gwrs hefyd, mae gyda ni dîm seibr ddiogelwch. Sleid nesaf, please. Wedyn, o ran goruchwylio a sicrwydd, mae gyda ni ddoi bwyllgor sydd yn cyfrannu at y gwybodaeth a'r risg gwybodaeth. Y cyntaf yw y pwyllgor llywodraethu a diogelwch digidol, yr Digital Governance and Safety Committee. So mae'r pwyllgor yma yn goruchwylio a rhoi sicrwydd ar gyfer nifer o bethau, a mae hwn yn cynnwys llywodraethu gwybodaeth, gwasanaethau gwybodaeth, seibr ddiogelwch, unrhyw ddigwyddiadau sy'n hysbysiadwy, hynny yw pethau mae rhaid i hysbysu i gwahanol lefydd dibynnu ar beth sydd wedi digwydd. Enghraifft i'r Information Commissioner's Office neu rhywbeth tebyg i hynna. A wedyn mae nhw'n hefyd yn edrych dros adolygu digwyddiadau a'r dysgu sydd yn dod mas o'r rheini. A wedyn wrth gwrs hefyd y prosesau sicrwydd gwybodaeth Cymru sydd gyda ni. Sleid nesaf, please. Wedyn yr ail bwyllgor yw'r un archwilio a sicrwydd, yr Audit and Assurance. Yn y cyd-destun hyn, hynny yw rheoli risg gwybodaeth. Mae nhw'n darparu goruchwyliaeth a sicrwydd ar gyfer rheoli risg, canlyniadau archwiliadau amrywiol, a wedyn olrhain cynnydd unrhyw gamau sydd angen ar gyfer hynna. A hefyd maen nhw sy'n gyfrifol am ein system rheoli ansawdd ni. So, slide nesaf, please. Drafod rhywfaint am yr datblygiadau allweddol gyda ni yn 2021 i 2022 yn y flwyddyn ddiwethaf. So, un o'r pethau wnaeth y bwrdd gymeradwyo ym mis Tachwedd oedd fframwaith rheoli risg. A mae hwn yn cynnwys nifer o feysydd sy'n ymwneud â rheoli risg gwybodaeth ac wrth gwrs pethau sydd ddim yn berthnasol. So, storio a cynnal gwybodaeth, cyrchu a rhannu gwybodaeth, cydymffurfiaeth, cyflenwi neu ddarparu gwasanaethau, a hefyd wrth gwrs enw da y sefydliad. So, sleid nesaf, please. So, hefyd, pethau wnaethon ni oedd ni wedi creu gwell cofrestr asedau gwybodaeth a phrosesau i fynd gyda hwn. Ni wedi gwella'n prosesau ni i reoli asedau technoleg gwybodaeth. Ni wedi cael cwmni annibynnol i wneud asesiad ransomware. Ni wedi cael gwared ar tipyn o hen seilwaith, dal tipyn o waith i wneud, a bydd hwn yn rhywbeth bydd yn digwydd yn barhaol wrth bod yn rhwydweithiau ni, yn servers ni, a beth bynnag yn mynd yn hen. Fe wnaethon ni gael achrediad gyda NHS Digital i alluogi trosglwyddo data sensitif neu data personol rhwng ein system e-bost ni yng Nghymru gyda NHS Mail yn Lloegr. A fe wnaethon ni gael achrediad prosesydd o dan deddf yr economi digidol. A mae hwn yn golygu byddwn ni'n medru derbyn mwy o setiau data yn ein rôl ni fel trusted third party i seil. Mae seil yn rhan o Brifysgol Abertawe, a mae hyn yn galluogi nhw i ymestyn eu gallu i wneud fwy o ymchwil neu ymchwil gwell. Sleid nesaf, please. A wedyn, so, yna i symud ymlaen nawr i drafod ychydig am yr archwiliadau fuodd yn ystod y flwyddyn. So, un o'r rhain oedd ISO 27001. Hwn yw'r safon ar gyfer system reoli diogelwch gwybodaeth. A fe wnaethon ni gael ymweliad arolygu ym mis Tachwedd, a wnaethon nhw fynd yn dda iawn. Yr ail un yw BS 10008, British Standard 10008. Mae hwn yn ymwneud gyda derbynoldeb cyfreithiol gwybodaeth electronig. Wnaeth hwn ddigwydd yn mis Rhagfyr, a mynd yn dda. Y mis Mawrth, fe gaethon ni archwiliad mewnol i Cyber ddiogelwch. Mae hwn yn cael ei wneud gan bartneriaeth cydmasanaethau Gwasanaeth Iechyd Cymru. So gan fewnol i'r Gwasanaeth Iechyd, dim yn fewnol i Iechyd y Gofal Digidol Cymru. A gaethon ni adroddiad da mas o hwnnw, a wedyn y mis Hydref fe wnaeth Archwilio Cymru wneud archwiliad i systemau technoleg gwybodaeth cenedlaethol. A wnaeth hwnnw fynd yn dda iawn hefyd. Sleid nesaf, please. So yn olaf wedyn, dwi jyst yn ei drafod rhai o'r pethau sydd gyda ni yn y cynllun ar gyfer y flwyddyn nesaf. So mae gyda ni brosiect i wella ein diogelwch cyber. Fel byddech chi'n disgwyl, mae hwn yn rhywbeth byddwn ni'n gwneud bob blwyddyn. Yn benodol, mae hwn yn delio leni gyda'r materion a nodwyd yn yr asesiad ransomware. Ni hefyd wedi creu strategaeth, byddwn ni'n creu strategaeth ac achos busnes i fynd gydag ar gyfer ein SIM ni. So mae hwn yn system sy'n derbyn data am faterion diogelwch ar gyfer nifer o'n systemau ni. So mae nifer o systemau'n bwydo fe gyda data, mae fe'n chwilio am batrymau, falle bydd angen i ni edrych mewn iddo. Mae'n contract gyda'r cyflenwyr sydd gyda ni yn gorffen y mis Mawrth 23, a wedyn angen ni weithio o hwn leni. Ni'n cael yn ail ardystio ar gyfer ISO 27001. So mae'r peth yn para am 2 blynedd. Ac wedyn ar diwedd y 2 blynedd, mae'n rhaid i chi mynd trwy'r broses o ail ardystio. Mae hwnnw'n digwydd gyda ni ymlaen ar hyn o bryd. A wedyn, byddwn ni'n hefyd yn rhyddhau platfform pecyn cymorth llywodraethu gwybodaeth Cymru newydd. Mae hwn yn cael ei ddefnyddio gyda nifer o sefydliadau yn cynnwys yr meddygon teulu. A hefyd byddwn ni'n datblygu achos busnes a wedyn rhedeg proses i brynu teclyn archwilio integredig deallus cenedlaethol NIAS, o'r National Integrated Intelligent Auditing Service. So mae angen i newid yr rhain yn ni. Mae hwn wedi system sydd wedi bod gyda ni ers nifer o flynyddoedd, ac mae angen system newydd yn ni nawr. Mae hwn yn edrych ar pwy sydd yn edrych ar ba ddata ac yn fflagio unrhyw bethau amheus bydd angen pobl i edrych mewn iddo. A wedyn, peth ola yw gwella'r gwybodaeth ni'n casglu yn yr gofrestr asedau gwybodaeth. Oce, dyna i gyd sydd gyda fi. Diolch yn fawr. Os gyda unrhyw gwestiynau, neu ngorau ateb.
Okay, thank you very much, Carwyn. And apologies, the builders have finished their very lengthy tea break, unfortunately, and are back with us. Helen, you want to kick off?
Yeah, so apologies. The drilling is happening behind me, but I just wanted to call out that I think it's really great to see this come into the board actually now, and this focus on information risk and our approach and setting out structures and what we've been doing actually, and how we what our approach is as an organisation to information risk. And I also think it's really good to highlight some of the areas where we've taken forward our ability to safely and securely share more information. So I kind of just wanted to call that out really, and that's the email standard to exchange mail between Wales and NHS England. I think that's been many years as an issue for NHS Wales, and clinically now that is a huge step forward that clinicians can exchange personal data and have that conversation in a far more straightforward way than they've been able to up to now. So a huge amount of work actually to achieve that standard and to set out all the security and safety aspects that we need to adhere to. So really wanted to call that one out. And of course, we touched on the trusted third party status that we've achieved as well recently. I think that's another one for us to acknowledge on this. And I guess really for me is this is the first time we've reported this to the board. it's incumbent on us as an NHS Wales organisation to report this annually to the board. In my previous role when I was in a health board, that was a lot more straightforward than perhaps in our organisation, and how the things that you report actually are pertinent to the clinical information. So we've tried to set this out in our context, but we would welcome, I think, speaking on behalf of Carwyn and Gareth and colleagues, we would welcome feedback really of how we evolve this now for future reporting.
Thank you, Helen. Ifan, you want to come in?
Just yn gyflym dau beth. Gyntaf, wi sy'n diolch i Carwyn am y cyflwyniad yna. Fi yw pencampwr dros yr iaith Gymraeg yn y sefydliad, a mae jyst yn dangos bod modd cyflwyno materion hynod o ddwys a technegol gyda llawer iawn o derminoleg yn hyderus ac yn glir iawn yn y Gymraeg. A mi'n credu bod hwnna yn beth ardderchog i weld. Ac yn ail, jyst yn cyfeirio nôl at y trafodaeth gaethon ni reit ar ddechrau'r cyfarfod ar y baff, ar y fframwaith sicrwydd ar gyfer y bwrdd. So mae beth chi newydd weld o ran y cyflwyniad fyna. Mae Carwyn wedi arwain ni trwy beth yw'r controls sydd gyda ni, y gweithdrefnau sydd gyda ni, pwyllgorau o'r bwrdd, yr safonau ISO, y safonau i ni'n cydymffurfio gyda nhw yn y sector ddigidol, a hefyd wedi gosod allan beth yw'n amcanion ni am y flwyddyn nesaf, sef lle i ni'n mynd mwyn cael mwy o sicrwydd bod ni'n gwneud y pethau cywir a bod ni'n gwneud nhw'n effeithiol iawn. Oedd sawl aelod wedi cyfeirio at sut ni'n cyfieithu'r Board Assurance Framework mewn i ffordd mae bobl yn gallu deall, a wy'n credu oedd hwnna yn enghraifft dda iawn o sut mae'r Board Assurance Framework yn gallu asio gyda yr adroddiadau ni'n cael i'r bwrdd mewn ffordd ddefnyddiol iawn.
Andrew.
I wasn't quite sure whether to say anything because working in information governance, I'm naturally biased, obviously, but I just think it's a hugely important area, and it's not just a benefit to the organisation, but it also is really, really important to the staff because it enables us to undertake our roles safely. So I just wanted to say that really, just a very quick one, but I always hesitate when we talk about information governance because obviously I'm very biased in that area.
Happy to see you patting yourself on the back, Andrew. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you very much, Carwyn. That was sorry, did you want to come in, Carwyn?
No, I just wanted to say thanks to all the people that helped me pull the report together, because it's been a joint effort from a number of teams, across the organisation that are responsible for the different parts of it, and pulling all of that into one report.
Yeah, so these things are always a part of a team effort, and please take back the board's appreciation of that team effort, resulting in a very clear report, which sets out very clearly where we are on a range of very important issues and where we're going on a range of very important issues. Thank you very much, Carwyn. Gareth, we can move on, I presume, now from. Well, no, we need to approve this report. So can I just speak for formality's sake? Just people are happy to do that. Thank you very much. If we then move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Independent Member Digital Network. If you recall, we were instrumental in establishing this, and David has reported on one meeting. This is the second meeting you're reporting on, I think, now, David, so over to you.
That's correct, thanks, Simon. Yeah, the second meeting of this new network was held on 27th of April. The terms of reference which are tabled at the launch meeting in January were formally approved with some amendments from members of the network incorporated into them. The position of chair was confirmed, and I will take on the role of chair for the next 12 months. And vice chair would be Maynard Davis from the network. We had three substantive topics on the agenda. The first of those was a briefing on cybersecurity from Carwyn Lloyd-Jones and Jamie Graham, which was really well received. It was very similar to the session that we as a board had at the board development session, which prompted some really good discussion, particularly around how independent members raised more awareness of cyber issues at the board level, particularly on the health boards, and the offer of support and help from Carwyn and Jamie to any of the other independent members was very well received by the network. So I'd like to pass on my thanks to Carwyn and Jamie for their support on that. The second substantive item was a briefing from Even on our new IMTP. One of the highlights that Even pulled out was the response to the COVID pandemic and how we, the DCW, had done that over and above the some of the stuff that was in our IMTP previously. There was an interesting debate that ensued around the challenge of evolving the funding model, not just for ourselves, but for the wider NHS in Wales. That was debated. It was general consensus amongst the IM members. So there is definitely a feeling that just goes beyond the DCW, that the funding model for digital IT does have to evolve over time if we're to deliver the benefits. And then the last substantive item was a presentation from Gartner on the new Welsh Government strategy for health and care. That was well received. The strategy was still really at a high level and is evolving, and the network requested that as it evolves and there is more detail, it would be really good to get an update on that at some point in the future. And then the last item was the date of the next meeting. This is a quarterly network meeting, and the next scheduled meeting is on the 20th of July this year. Questions?
You're on mute, Simon.
I'm on mute. Sorry, Tazy just running. It's to avoid you listening to the builders. Thank you very much, David. And just to sort of underpin what you said, it's so the getting the cyber issue and the cybersecurity issue in front of key IMs for health boards is so helpful and so important, because we can only be as good as we can be, and we need to ensure that the whole system is as good as it possibly can be. So that's very helpful indeed. Has anyone else got any other comments or questions? Marion.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to add, to build on your comments, the NHS Audit Chairs Network received a very helpful presentation, again from Carwyn Lloyd-Jones and JB on the cyber security issue, and it was extremely well received, and I think it just underlines the importance of us taking these messages out more widely, which was the point you made. So I just like to extend my thanks on behalf of the Audit Chairs Network to both Carwyn and Jamie. Diolch yn fawr i chi.
Thank you, Marion. Helen.
Yeah, just to say that we shared the papers with the digital directors peer group this week as well from the IM network discussions, and actually we're going to regularly ask now whether there are agenda items that the community of digital leadership actually want to bring to the table. That was very well received this week. So good.
It's great to see. It's fulfilling the potential that we always knew it had, David. So and thank you for taking on the role of chairing it. So we note that report and note the date of the next meeting. We move on to the next item, which is the Local Partnership Forum Highlight Report, and this is a shared endeavour between Helen and Andrew. And on the last occasion, I think Helen, you were were chairing the meeting, so I think you're presenting this report.
Yes, apologies. So just a quick update. Really good meeting, and thank you, Chair, for joining us at the meeting actually to engage with the Partnership Forum and the staff and trade union representatives that are there. So we have some standard agenda items, as you'd expect, that we cover. We routinely, clearly we focus in on our workforce and some of the key opportunities and challenges and any changes really that materially impact on the workforce. So we regularly review the workforce performance report and the dashboard and discuss kind of opportunities for how we can improve some of those areas of focus for us, like PADRs, the personal development reviews for staff, even more pertinent now as it'll be tied to to pay progression for certain points of the pathway. So it's a very important areas that we cover, and focusing on hybrid working and taking on board any feedback. But there's a lot of, I guess what I would say is, and Andrew I'll bring Andrew in on this. There's a lot of conversations that go on between kind of staff side representatives and our workforce colleagues to make sure that any recommendations on how we're going to work as an organisation are actually fully kind of their collective and collaborative views and recommendations that come up to us as a management team. And we did go through actually the initial findings that have come from the workforce, the digital workforce review that we undertook on behalf of Welsh Government. So that's not been formally kind of completed yet with the final report. So we're awaiting that, but we had a really good discussion about what that looked like and where we were for that. And we spent a bit of time actually on some of the recommendations that have come recently from the National Cyber Security Centre on some of the terminology that's used within IT and IT landscape. So we agreed to change some of our commonly used phrases actually in IT to reflect some of the recommendations that came from the Cyber Security Centre. So yeah, that was that. I'm not sure, Andrew, if you want to comment on anything from your side of things.
I think I was just going to say that I wanted to reiterate the value of the local partnership program, and apologies for my voice, by the way. I'm still very hoarse, so I am trying my best. The last meeting particularly was very, very engaging, and just to, as Helen said, we do meet very often outside of local partnership forum, at least weekly, very often a lot more than that, with various leads throughout the organisation. And we're also embedded in a lot of the working groups that are undertaking specific activities. Health and Wellbeing Group is a good example, but there are a lot of others. I look forward to chairing the next meeting, which is going to be a very, very busy meeting, as usual. But yeah, nothing more to add, but just to reassure members that we are very much engaged in the working of the organisation.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Helen. And I enjoyed the opportunity to meet your colleagues, Andrew, at the meeting. It was great. Any comments or questions? In which case we're asked to note the contents of that report and then move on to the report of the next committee, which is the Digital Governance and Safety Committee. And as you know, Rowan has given her apologies. So, David, you're back in the hot seat as the vice chair of that committee.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, we had the last DGNS meeting on the 12th of May. I'll give you some highlights. Under the consent agenda, we received two reports, the Senior Information Risk Owners Annual Report, which Carwyn has just gone through. We had visibility of that at DGNS before it came to the main board. We also received an internal audit report on the recently completed data centre move. Normally I wouldn't comment on that, but this was a complex undertaking with lots of potential risk, and the project was delivered on time and slightly under budget. So on behalf of the committee, I would like to pass on our thanks to Carwyn and the team via Gareth for a job really well done. Under the main item, on main agenda items, we received an update from Rachel on the evolving research and innovation strategy, which again was well received, and we look forward to seeing the strategy when it's complete and it's back with us at the board in September. Under the review of the corporate risk register, of the 16 corporate risks, 13 of those are assigned to the Digital Governance and Safety Committee, of which 8 of those are received in private. And just to pick up the point that was well made by Ruth earlier, as the IM on this committee, I would challenge the fact that it needed to be in private, and I'm happy to report back that all of the risks that were reviewed in private were appropriately reviewed in private. There were a number of risks removed from the corporate risk register since the last time we met, which was pleasing. There were a few risks added, which Chris has already covered. We reviewed the mitigations in place for all of those risks and noted them accordingly. We also received a report on the incident review and learning. Pleased to report that there were no nationally reportable incidents during the quarter, which is great. There were 11 incidents that were reviewed during the quarter, and 27 of the ones from this year have been reviewed and closed. Under assurance reports, we received 2 reports on information governance, informatics and information assurance, service assurance. And we also received an update on the emerging Welsh Information Governance Toolkit, which was well received and is good work in progress. We also received the digital program overview update. We noted the new date for CANISC, which Helen has already covered, and that was well received. The Welsh Hospital Pharmacy Stock System has been removed from that programme on the basis that it's now live and is therefore no longer one that we will be looking at. And the impact of potential funding cuts around DPIT was a subject of quite a bit of conversation, and pleased to note from the report that Claire has given at this meeting that actually she's done a lot of really good work to mitigate the impact of that. So that was a major concern that we had. So pleased that that has now evolved and the impact has been mitigated. The last thing we did in the public session was we had a briefing on patient identity. This was a really good presentation which alluded to the complexity of doing this within the organisation, and some really good feedback from Rob around how we are addressing that challenge. That prompted quite a bit of discussion and was well received. That was the end of the public session, and we then received 8 risks from the corporate risk register, which were reviewed in private, along with 1 item from the incident reviewed. All of those were reviewed, noted, and we reviewed the mitigations, and we're reasonably happy with all of the work that's been undone to mitigate those. The last note was the date of the next meeting, which is the 4th of August this year.
Thank you very much indeed, David. Are there any comments or questions? If not, people happy to note David's report of that meeting. Thank you very much. And then the next one is remuneration in terms of service committee, which I will present as chair of that, and the committee which met on the 19th of May was asked to ratify the appointment of the interim executive director of operation, and approved their terms of services, which clearly, as Gareth is sitting here, we did. So that was the only substantive item on that agenda. If anyone queries, if I could ask people again to note that report, to note the content of this report. Thank you very much. And then moving to yourself, Marion, as chair of the Audit and Assurance Committee, if you'd like to present a highlight report of the meeting which took place on the 3rd of May.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd, a mae'n bleser gen I gyflwyno i chi adroddiad y Pwyllgor archwilio sicrwydd a gynhaliwyd ar ddechrau'r mis yma. Cyfarfod rhithiol yn ôl yn arfer bellach, a mae yna recordiad o'r cyfarfod ar gael ar wefan iechyd a gofal digidol Cymru. Mi oedd yn gyfarfod adeiladol, yn gyfarfod cynhwysfawr, a mi welwch chi'n y papur y prif brynciau trafod yn fanna, a ni ar ddechrau ail flwyddyn yn bodolaeth fel Pwyllgor. Mae'n dda gen I ddeud bod na gonsensws dwi'n credu bod ni'n gwneud fedi fel Pwyllgor o ran natur ag ansawdd y papurau a'r trafodaethau, a mae wedi bod yn gylondydd gweld hynny dwi'n credu. A hoffwn i fanteisio'r cyfle i ddiolch yn wir i'r cyfarwyddwr cyllid, i ysgrifennydd y bwrdd ag i'r tîm sy'n cefnogi gwaith y Pwyllgor mor drwyadol. Chi wedi cael cyfle I ddarllen yr adroddiad, felly dwi am gyfyngu'n sylwadau I nifer fach o faterion sydd falle yn teilyngu sylw pellach. A mi dwi am ddechrau efo adroddiad yr archwilwyr mewnol. Yn benodol, mi oedd na 3 archwiliad penodol. Archwiliad prosiect symud y ganolfan ddata I ddechrau, a gafodd radd sicrwydd sylweddol gan yr archwilwyr. Eithon ni mlaen wedyn at archwiliad trefniadaeth llywodraethiant rhan 2, gradd sicrwydd rhesymol yn y fan honno, ac yn yr un modd, gradd sicrwydd rhesymol i'r archwiliad ar ddatblygiad systemau. Fe ddaru ni hefyd gymeradwyo y cynllun archwilio mewnol newydd ar gyfer y blwyddyn ariannol bresennol 22-23, a mi oedden ni, fel pwyllgor, yn gwerthfawrogi trwyder, dwi'n credu, y trafodaethau cynnar a gafon ni wrth i'r cynllun yma gael ei ddatblygu, a mi oedd hwnna yn bwysig i ni, dwi'n credu. Diweddariad wedyn gan Archwilio Cymru, ac eithon ni y cynllun gwaith ar gyfer eleni, a fydd am y tro cyntaf yn cynnwys asesiad strwythurol, sef y Structured Assessment, fel y byddwch chi'n ei ddisgwyl. Mi fydd hwnnw yn adeiladu ar yr asesiad gwaelodlin a ddigwyddodd y llynedd, a mae wedi bod yn braf gweld perthynas waith gadarnhaol, dwi'n credu, yn datblygu dros y blwyddyn ddiwetha rhwng yr archwilwyr a swyddogion iechyd a gofal digidol Cymru. A fel y byddwch chi'n disgwyl, mi gaethon ni nifer o'r adroddiadau, diweddariadau corfforaethol arferol, yn cynnwys adroddiad gwrthdwyll. Mi gaethon ni ddiweddariad ar y cyfrifon blynyddol, y cyfeiriodd y cyfarwyddwr cyllid aton gynharach, adroddiad ar gofrestr risg, ac adroddiad ar fuddiant ag anrhegion, datganiad o fuddiant ag anrhegion, adroddiad ar archebu prynu gwerth uchel, adroddiad caffael, diweddariad ar gydymffurfiaeth ansawdd a rheoleiddio, ac adroddiad ar gydymffurfiaeth stadau. Mi oedd na ddiweddariad hefyd ar yr ymchwiliad i Covid-19, yr ymchwiliad sydd yn digwydd ar draws y Deyrnas Unedig, gwybodaeth a sicrwydd yn nodi'r gwaith sydd yn mynd rhagddo i'n paratoi ni fel Dhcw ar gyfer unrhyw gyfraniad y bydd rhaid i ni ei wneud i'r ymchwiliad yna. Ac yn ola, mi gaethon ni ddiweddariad ar ein cydymffurfiaeth ni o ran gofynion yr iaith Gymraeg, a mae wedi bod yn braf gweld y cynnig cadarnhaol sydd wedi bod ers penodiad diweddar rheolwr gwasanaethau Cymraeg. Ac fel yr aelod lleug sydd yn cefnogi pencampwr y Gymraeg, Ifan oedd yn nodi hynny'n gynharach, gai ddweud bod wedi bod yn braf iawn gweld lle mor amlwg i'r Gymraeg yn y cyfarfod yma, a gai ddiolch i bawb am y cyfraniad hwnnw. Gobeithio bod hynny'n rhoi rhywfaint o flas i chi yn gwaith ni fel pwyllgor archwilio, ond hapus i gymryd cwestiynau os oes. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, diolch, Marian. Anyone got any questions or comments? No, and again, we note that report for assurance. Lovely. Thank you all very much indeed. As I've had any other urgent business communicated to me, doesn't appear that there's anyone who's absolutely desperate to raise something, so that's great. The date of the next meeting is Thursday, the 28th of July. Before closing the meeting, I would like to thank one unseen contributor to the meeting today, but certainly heard, and that's Neris for the translation. We've probably that has probably enabled more use of the Welsh language in a formal board meeting than I suspect many other organisations do in the health service do across Wales. So that's really appreciated, Neris. Thank you very much for that. For all of us who needed, who were sort of linguistically challenged, shall we put it, and needed your assistance, it was excellent. It truly was. So thank you all very much, and thank you all very much for helping me land the meeting bang on time. For board members, we have a break. We do have a private session in half an hour, so I'll see you back here in half an hour with it's a different login, isn't it, Chris? So And thank you all to those of you who have been watching in real live time, and to all of those of you who may be watching a recording of the board meeting. Thank you all very much.